observation I would like to make is that there's a lot in front of us. There's the need to do in kind of basic blocking and tackling. There's we should think about this, but it is a top priority or not, kind of be pushed off. And then in my views, there's increasingly a few things that we haven't spent a lot of time talking about that I would characterize as almost existential in some respects. And the question ultimately is going to be how we prioritize and how we manage all of the various initiatives and activities that we may want to undertake. Certainly that I would like to see us at least consider undertaking. Neither I nor the town staff have the capability to do everything. Ultimately, my hope is, and thus far it's been realized, is that each council member, particularly in their issue areas, will take the laboring oar on a lot of this work, and that as we reconstitute and reappoint new committees, the committees themselves as well will be extraordinary sources of input, research, analysis, recommendations, etc., and we go well beyond just kind of the, gee, here's my opinion on something. They actually will help us to achieve intended objectives. But with that, I'd just open it up to anybody else for any initial comments.
Well, I think it's a great idea. You and I have chatted before. There's an awful lot on your plate, which is represented by this very extensive agenda. And to be honest, I think the only way you can get all of these things done proficiently is to delegate downward to the rest of us. So I think this is, I'm very happy to hear it.
Anybody else?
You mentioned prioritization. I think that's going to be the second thing. Once we get kind of assignments, if you will, it's between you and us. We need to prioritize and get done what we need to get done now, soon, and then later. That's kind of the way I think about that.
I agree with both. I just say don't sacrifice the long term for the short term as we're thinking about that.
Well, certainly, apropos of that, you know, I've been probably overly focused on some of the short-term blocking and tackling over the last few months. I personally I'd like to prefer to focus on some of the long-term issues. And we'll talk about that a little bit over the course of today and tomorrow. I'll address some of that in the town hall meeting this afternoon as well. So first, health, safety, and security of our citizens. Health, safety, and welfare, ultimately, of our citizens is kind of job one. It's the reason that municipalities exist, is to provide for the health, safety, and welfare of their citizens. This is a little bit more public safety oriented in this aspect. The one issue I'll just tee up initially to both from a little bit of informational aspect and then figure out how we want to begin moving forward is the with regard to an assessment of our public safety resources available on Kiowa Island, which includes law enforcement, includes code enforcement, it includes KICA security, it includes KIGR security, and any security the club may have. As you all know, we had retained a consultant to engage in a feasibility study to assess, do a needs assessment and gap analysis with regard to law enforcement resources. What do we have available? What are the incidences of whether it's criminal activity or other activity that may warrant a reassessment of the amount of law enforcement resources available to the island or that we contract for specifically, and then figure out where to go from there. Councilmember Berner's really taking the lead on this particular issue going forward. I think it's fair to say that we've been more than disappointed with the analysis that's been done thus far. But the one thing I think it's important to understand, and the community ultimately I think needs to understand this, is that knock on wood, we actually don't have much criminal activity on Kiowa Island. The analysis has been done by the consultant, and information we've gotten from CCSO indicated that over the course of the year, there were approximately 80 calls, I believe.
Turn your mics on, please.
Thank you. 80 calls that were logged in the category of potential crimes against persons or property. And if you look for the laundry list of how the Charleston County Sheriff's Office logs those, there's a wide variety of things. And we have no actual information as to whether there were actually any crimes committed. In some of those cases, they were probably a missing bike or something like that. Whether it was stolen or not, we don't know, but that was certainly not anything that would necessarily warrant, a response time issue. So number one, we don't have a lot of criminal activity. Again, we're very blessed. That's in part because we're a little bit isolated down here at the end of Johns Island. It's part because we have a gate, although the consultant would tell you it's a fairly porous gate. We've had a lot of conversations about that in KICA, or KICA's had a lot of conversation about that in their meetings. The other thing I don't think that the community appropriately understands is we actually have a lot of law enforcement coverage on the island. We have had, and to what extent we will continue to have remains to be seen. But until recently, we had a new sheriff's election. We had the prior sheriff had assigned essentially a shadow, created essentially a shadow district, District 11. It used to be just a district that covered all of Johns Island and Wadmalaw, that there were two patrol officers and a supervisor assigned essentially southern Johns Island. Edenvale South to include that part of Johns Island and Seabrook, and Kiowa Island. So that was their patrol area during regular shift, I believe for 12 hours over the course of a day. In addition to that, town once upon a time actually also had a contract with the Charleston County Sheriff's Office to provide full-time on-duty coverage. Again, over the same, I think, 12 hours a day period. That contract was canceled by the Sheriff's Office a couple of years ago, and it was after that contract was canceled that the sheriff then, Sheriff Graziano, established the Shadow District. In addition to that, the town has contracted for off-duty deputies. Apparently, unbeknownst to most of our residents, we receive on average about 800 hours a month of coverage from off-duty deputies. They can sign up. We've allowed for 2 deputies to sign up for each shift. We don't necessarily get 2 deputies every shift, but in many cases we do, and those are 3 8-hour shifts, 24/7, probably the least coverage where you don't always have 2. In some cases, you may not even have 1, is the midnight to 8 a.m. shift. How critically important it is to have deputy coverage or not, given that period of time, we can talk about that. But we've had about 800 hours on average. And that's in addition to the 24/7 KICA security, and that's in addition to the other resources, Charleston County Sheriff's Office resources, that may be on or around Kiowa Island at a given point in time. Separate from the patrol, it includes detectives investigating crimes on Johns Island. It includes traffic enforcement and others.
Doesn't KICA also have a contract? They've been doing speeding enforcement under a KICA contract, haven't they?
They do have a contract, not as extensive as ours.
It's not really as extensive, and they really only do it, when I checked with them, they did it only for like 2 months. So it's not, because they really just utilize currently probably what we already have.
Now, but they have contracted with CCSO for some traffic enforcement, speed enforcement.
saying, it was just about 2 months, based when she looked at the budget.
2 months total. I mean, but spread over a long period of time.
Not spread over a long period of time, but about 2 months.
Well, for example, there was a CCSO traffic, one of the same kind of the same device that we had that was outside Mingo Point's been on island recently.
Well, yeah, if you're talking device as opposed to actually personnel, so I'm not sure.
But it
But
would
there
have
was-
required CCSO to come in and do that. And,
Put it out there,
yeah.
but if you, yeah.
So but yes, they do occasionally contract the resort contracts for off-duty deputy coverage during major events. We certainly saw that in the marathon, and I probably said hello to 30 deputies. I know others did as well during that period of time. They were actually at almost every corner of Kiowa Island. The issue is right now, we've had a transition in the sheriff's office. We're in the process of setting up a meeting with the new sheriff. Craig's been in contact with him, and Stephanie has. I've been directly in contact with him as well. We need to better understand what his staffing priorities are. I think it's fair to say that there was a challenging relationship, I don't want to say between the town and the prior sheriff's administration, but there were some issues that probably precluded us from having as good a relationship as we would like to have had. I think that will be different going forward, but that remains to be seen. Certainly, Sheriff Ritchie is very familiar with Kiowa Island.
So, Mr. Mayor, how close are we to starting that engagement with the new sheriff? Imminent, or?
It's the scheduling for that meeting is literally in kind of process. It's going to happen soon. He just got sworn in a couple of weeks ago. And I don't know if there's any update on actual scheduling. Sergeant Maldwin had reached out to me and left a message before, but nothing had happened in that regard.
Good morning. Yes, we are setting those schedules up. I will be getting some dates that we can kind of coordinate with the mayor availability between now and next week, in 2 weeks, and set up the meeting with the mayor, the sheriff, his cabinet as well with our individual people.
So I'm sorry, schedule it in the next 2 weeks, we'll have a meeting in the next 2 weeks?
We'll have a scheduled meeting next 2 weeks, yes. I just have to narrow down what's available for the mayor.
But the biggest issue that we're going to, once we get better information, the more immediate issue that we're going to have to deal with as a town is our off-duty deputy contract. It has expired by its terms. I think it's still essentially in effect.
Yeah.
I think deputies are signing up. The contract itself is extraordinarily problematic in a couple of respects, one legal and liability. Unbeknownst to me until some period of time ago, I didn't know this well back in the past, the deputies are actually on our employment rules. That is they're also on Charleston County's employment rules. That is actually an issue under the state constitution, interestingly enough, of holding two different offices. Wholly apart from that, there are liability concerns that we don't have any direction or control, we're not doing any vetting, yet they're deemed our employees. The language of the on-duty contract, I actually thought addressed all those previously. The off-duty contract has been problematic. The off-duty contract that we executed is a kind of a standard form contract Charleston County Sheriff's puts out, and it's really designed for private sector employment, part-time employment of off-duty deputy contracts. You even read the language in there, it refers to like the company. And there's no constitutional issue with regard to dual employment in the private sector and the public sector.
So Brad, I'm sorry, excuse me, do these employees you're referring to actually get a W-2 at the end of the year from us? They actually get a W-2, not a 1099?
Yes. And they should be 1099. Either, well, no, either, the construct should be one of two things. Either they're contracting directly with us as independent contractors and they get a 1099.
1099 then, right.
Or we have a contractual relationship with CCSO to provide these services, and all our money goes to CCSO, and then they pay their own employees.
What do other towns, communities do about this situation? Do you know? Like Folly Beach or Seabrook, what do they do?
Well, so other towns, so when we started this process, council at the time was aware, they talked about either W-2 or 1099. They decided to do W-2 because at the time prior to me starting, they felt like this would generate more deputies signing up. I think now since we've increased, the sheriff's office increased the deputy hourly rate and council approved that. I think that's why we're seeing an uptick. But to go back, council at the time made a conscious decision to go ahead W-2 because we were able to get more. We pay into their retirement. That was the big pull.
Do they like the retirement?
It was retirement. And at the time, we were paying into, there's two separate retirements. There's a police retirement and non-police retirement. We were paying into the non-police. So essentially, they were getting two pots into their retirement. They were getting what's called PORS and what's called essentially SCRS, which is just non-police retirement. That was enticing to them. At the time, one jurisdiction that I know that was essentially mirror what we were doing was the town or city of Folly Beach. They essentially took our off-duty deputy contract and mirrored it. I don't know if they're still doing that now. They may have switched over to 1099. I reached out to them and I just don't recall within the last couple of years.
Well, I'm just thinking, this is
They were
a
the-
situation that can't be brand new. I mean, other communities have been around
Other
forever.
communities
so
have, but I don't
what
know
do
if they've now transitioned to 1099 or
Yeah,
not. They were
I'm not
doing,
aware, I've asked, I'm not aware that there are other communities that have off-duty deputies who are employed by another jurisdiction as W-2 employees.
And as you guys know, a lot of other Folly Beach, IOP, Sullivan's Island, they have their own police department, so they really were essentially supplementing for just special events or different things. But I know Folly Beach was W-2, but I don't know if they switched out.
Now,
Thank you.
if they want to address the retirement issue, if they're employees of Charleston County and they're getting extra hours that we're paying for, and so the cost that we're paying for directly to Charleston County includes their hourly rate plus all of their retirement benefits, then that's how they can get additional retirement benefits. Or if they're 1099 and we need to gross up in order to attract, then that's an economic decision that we need to make. So above the $55 an hour, it may be we need to pay $75 an hour.
Well, we have to pay whatever the market requires. So that part of the equation to me is rather easy. The second part is actually, I think, kind of easy, is why we shouldn't reinvent the wheel. Let's reach out and see what other people do.
Well, apart from the legal construct, or the form of the contract and whether if we go down this path, whether it's a 1099 W-2, whether the contractual relationship is with each individual off-duty deputy or with the Charleston County Sheriff's Office itself, I think the bigger question is, we spend a little over $500,000 on the off-duty deputy contract. Do we feel that, we want to continue to have that same off-duty deputy contract? Do we think we need 2 deputies throughout the day that are not under our control and direction? They're supposedly working on on Kiowa Island or the town of Kiowa Island, which would include.
Well, to answer that question, we first have to hear what the
That's-
new
yeah.
Sheriff Ritchie is going to do. So that's step one before we make a decision on what you just proffered.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was coming from. Step one is to get the meeting scheduled and build a relationship, right?
That's a top.
And then have him understand what his obligations are and what his resources are. And then step two is, what do we want and how do we want it? And I'm concerned about the W-2 aspect from if we have employees that we're not supervising and something goes wrong, that's a real big problem for me, from a legal standpoint. So we're gonna, if anything happens, we're gonna lose that right off the top. And then number 3 is evaluation value proposition. Do we want 1 or 2? What does it cost? How is it structured? I think all those things kind of fall in place once you start the process of developing a relationship.
And you touched on it, Luke, but there's another liability that I don't think we've talked about enough. That's, what if they shoot somebody? You know, what happens then? You know, who's indemnifying them? And it sounds like it's us in both scenarios, but have we?
Well, the Charleston County would say, well, they're our responsibility, but at the end of the day, if there is somebody that has a bad experience and is going to file lawsuits against everybody, and they're going to say they were acting as your employee,
Or contract.
town of Kiowa Island, during that incident. And so where does the primary liability and responsibility lie?
All right,
And
so
that's,
let's,
Mac's not here, but that's, and we don't need to solve this problem right now, but to me, that's where it comes, where we pay Charleston County and reimburse them, and their employees are under their supervision.
That's where I was going.
Their liability.
Yep.
And we're just happen to be
They
funding
invoice
some of
us.
it.
And if we, my view is, I think probably some form of off-duty contract makes sense. How much is a legitimate issue, but it can't be the current form that it is.
yeah, so I think that as part of my new responsibility of the day to move things along, I think we've already identified the concerns we have, and the initial step is to get on board with the sheriff, and then we can reconvene and discuss the next step after we talk to the new sheriff and our own council, so. It does kind of segue, though, into the next issue, which is this police study that we contracted to have performed. So to let everybody know, we went out with a very detailed, a very precise solicitation that we received, I think 5 bids back from. The winner was a firm, we had a selection committee. The committee selected this organization, CPSM. The solicitation required a lot of things, such as a review of the current police force services being provided, a projection of what the impact to the police services coverage would be for future growth on the island, which would include not just on the island, but Freshfields and neighboring communities, to identify different alternates for providing services, and this would be potential alternates. One of the big things was to perform a comprehensive needs assessment and a gap analysis. And there's many, many more items, but those are the big ones. So we received a very thick preliminary draft. This is not a final, and this is a work in progress. It's 70-somewhat pages long. It did not answer any of the questions that were in our solicitation, not a one. All that it did was gather in a database different kinds of reporting figures such as crime and thefts and who has initiated it. But, you know, yes, they were. They were specific for Kiowa. But they created a lot of pie charts and different bar charts and graphs. And all he really did was refilter this data in different ways to provide different types of not even conclusions, to show you different kinds of effects of the data. One of the big things that that was particularly troubling to me, he created pie charts, and the pie chart was to identify where the biggest component was. And he said many times that what the deputies on the island were doing were miscellaneous work. And that's all it was identified to be, was miscellaneous. And miscellaneous in the pie chart was identified to be more than 50% of what they were doing during the day. First question is, what is miscellaneous? No idea.
Similarly, biggest component, again, more than 50%, and a different way he filtered the data was deputy-initiated call. Or what is a deputy-initiated call? No answer. So the report is really a bunch of garbage, to put it frankly. We had a meeting with, Brad and I and Craig, and had a meeting with the owner of the report. And we let him know that we were very unhappy. And the biggest thing is that, as I went through this list of requirements from the solicitation, he just didn't meet any of them. And one of the things I know we had identified is an easy, low-hanging fruit has to do with the front gate. Everybody in the island knows about the front gate. Everybody in this room knows about the front gate. You know, what can we do about that? The report had nothing with respect to a recommendation to what to do with the front gate, which to me is shocking. So at the end of the day, what the report astonishingly suggested is that we create our own police force at a cost of $1.8 million a year.
16-person police force.
Shocking. But there were no other options included in the report other than that conclusion. All right, so at the end of the day, we told him, no, this is not acceptable, go back and try again. I sent him an email, an extensive email, saying, here are all the things that were in the solicitation that you have not responded to. And we haven't heard back yet. It's time to do a follow-up call, which I will do, but that's where we are with this police study.
I'm sure they had an offer to help us set up that police force for a cost.
Could be. We have. You can take that, Brad. Yes, and that is a fair point. He had trouble getting the data from, well, what you're saying, Stephanie, is correct. He had a lot of trouble getting the raw data that he then used different filtering ways from the current sheriff. But the issue is then, if he had problems getting the data, he should have managed, and I use these words specifically with him. I said, what you failed to do was to manage the expectations of your client. There was zero management of that.
By the way,
And-
that's complicated by the fact that I had gotten the data that he was requesting separately, 3 months' worth, specific to Kiowa Island from the sheriff's office. No big issue. I asked for it, I got it.
And on top of all that, if, as Stephanie said, he did have trouble getting the data from the sheriff. Right, but then, don't prepare a report yet. If you're having trouble with the data, manage the expectations of your client. There's no reason to put out the report because it's a waste of time and effort on his part. So I'm very, very, very concerned that we're going to get an acceptable product at the end. But we felt that we had to give him another opportunity. So that's what is happening now, and we're waiting.
To your question, Councilmember Kay, this contract, I believe, was for $77,000. We've already paid them $58,000.
15
58.
out of the 77? Yeah, because for me, this entire discussion starts with the identification of actual crime statistics. What are we seeing? What is the nature of what we're seeing? How often do we see it, and is it handled?
Well, so
Until we have that very baseline data, all of the other questions to me are peripheral.
Well, the one thing he did have in this report was what you just wanted to see. Although he filtered it many different ways that are not useful, and we don't know what miscellaneous means, and we do not know what deputy-initiated calls mean. But what came out of the report, the data that he did have, was that we have no crime on the island. I mean, it's petty crime. He also did things about response times and things like that, but at the end of the day, we don't have a problem on the island with respect to crime. Very good question. We don't have it. Very good
I guess he
question.
consults on setting that up.
Very good question.
Well, so, there was data, their calls, one thing I would note, I don't remember the number was exact, I believe there were 81 calls that they responded to that were logged on Kiowa Island as under the category of either crimes against persons or crimes against property. Now, there is a little chart in here that shows, what is under those categories, and includes phone threat, indecency, lewdness, harassment, vandalism, fraud, property damage, residential burglary, drug. There's a whole bunch of stuff, but part of the problem is 81 logged calls related to something in that category, but not a single indication of whether, in fact, there was an actual crime against person or property that occurred.
They all sound like security enforcement issues, not.
Well, some of them probably so. But nonetheless, people either, somebody called in to 911 or 311, and there was follow-up on that. But
So that's the status. We're waiting to get another report or another phone call conversation with them to see where we're going. Pending, not paying that. We've discussed ways to retrieve or try to claw back what has been spent, but we have to wait and see what the next report says first. Yes, yeah, all of that. Any other questions, guys?
But I think you're right. End of the day, let's figure out what the problem is. What is the need? What is the need for custodial arrest authority? Because most of the incidents that occur on Kiowa Island are either violations of municipal ordinances, which law enforcement cannot enforce anyway, or they're violations of KICA rules and regulations, which is the responsibility of KICA to address and regulate. But none of our code enforcement officers, nor none of the security personnel of the resort or KICA have custodial arrest authority. So if there is a crime, it's a state law, a violation of state law, which includes, by the way, traffic enforcement, cannot be addressed by KICA security other than KICA security can only enforce speeding or speeding related issues against its members as a member violation. Town can't enforce speeding violations. By the way, that constitutes enforcement of traffic issue is a custodial arrest. It meets the definition of a custodial arrest. So the question is, on the island, what are the incidents that would require the need for a law enforcement officer who has custodial arrest authority? Those situations do arise, they can arise, and then the question becomes, what do we think we need to have in place to best address that? To include that's right, that's absolutely, Freshfields, and that's probably where more of the issue, you're absolutely right, more of the issue than anything else. And in fact, it's probably, there was, you all may be aware that there was a murder suspect that was recently apprehended who was working, I believe, at Cafe Eugenia. And what's that? Katina 76. And the U.S. Marshal and Office and CCSO arrested that individual. There was a foot chase. We did have an incident of, you may be familiar with the Cove, this goes back 6-8 months ago now, where there was a stolen police vehicle that was chased onto Kiowa Island on Beachwalker Drive, and I walked down the street kind of in the middle of all that, and there were a dozen police vehicles. So we actually got a pretty good response to a real crime activity that was occurring on the island at that point in time. But anyway, that's kind of where we are. We need more information. We need to talk to the sheriff's office
Did they acknowledge the beach and the beach patrol? Was that an aspect of the report? Did they talk to that?
One of the things we specifically, as Russ noted, was that we asked for, you know, a needs assessment gap analysis, but part of that was understanding what are all of the resources available on the island to respond to various kinds of incidents. And that was not provided. We've had to gather data ourselves. We know how many code enforcement officers we have. We know Beach Patrol. We know how many people on the Kika security staff now. And not all of those patrol, but they do patrol. We have a better understanding of the dozen or so that the resort has that respond to incidents on the resort's property. I believe, actually, the resort, one of the resort security personnel is actually SLED certified. So that means there is actually a person on the island that does have custodial arrest authority.
And Craig is certified.
Oh, you are as well, okay. So,
So you can arrest.
okay, so we, we do have some custodial arrest authority wholly apart from the relationship with CCSO, whether regular duty coverage or off-duty coverage, so.
All right, so moving this along, unless there's any other questions, that's the status. I just wanted to keep you guys informed. Work in progress. Next item, Brad, is code enforcement policies and priorities.
So the issue here is to make sure that both from an internal operational management standpoint, as well as externally communicating, that we actually have some policies and procedures regarding code enforcement. At the end of the day, you read a lot of other communities' code enforcement policies. They actually have them. They'll have them available on their website. We don't have those yet, but they're in process. Is that the idea is to encourage compliance with codes. It's not to generate revenues by issuing fines or citations. We need to have our ducks in a row as between our own code enforcement team that is under the Public Safety Department under Craig, as well as Beach Patrol. They have code enforcement authority both on the beach as well as a contract for code enforcement services focused on short-term rental compliance for the evening. But a recent incident kind of highlighted why we need to have a better set of policies. And you sent an email about that, and I got some calls and expressions of concern about that. It was on the January 1st, New Year's Day. Beachwalker County Park was closed. There were probably a dozen or more cars that were parked along Beachwalker Drive in violation of clear no parking signs. I was walking along there, that day, walking the dog down to the beach, and kind of my inclination was no harm, no foul. It was New Year's Day, Johns Island families visiting the beach, the park was closed. But having said that, they were parking in violation right next to signs. But part of the issue was that, and I believe it was one of the Beach Patrol that issued the citations, is that correct? So, and I believe they issued a $125 ticket to each, 100, okay, 100 to each of the vehicles, and I believe the town has been not appropriately applying state law in this regard. They have automatically added the state assessment to that, so it became a $225 ticket. Now, I'm not, at the end of the day, questioning the issuance of the tickets in that particular case, and unless and until we had a policy otherwise that we had communicated that said, by the way, look the other way on holidays or incidents like that. The issue was a $100 ticket for a parking violation, and what's not really a $100 ticket, it's a $225 ticket. Why wasn't it a $50 ticket? Who decided it was $100? And, And we hadn't communicated with you guys. We didn't have any policies or procedures that I'm aware of. You guys may be aware. You may want to talk about that, Rob or Waz. But I don't want to focus so much on this particular incident, but it just kind of was a reinforcer that as a community, as a town, we need to establish our code enforcement priorities. When do we issue verbal warnings, written warnings? When do we escalate to actually issuing a citation? Can we issue a citation that is not a uniform summons in the first instance, so they can only pay the face amount of the ticket and don't have to pay the assessment? And what are the types of nature of violations that actually may warrant an immediate citation and indeed a summons? And that's clearly imminent threat to public safety, or you can identify some other things, but actually outlining that. You guys may or may not have that as part of your protocols, but we don't have that for a town as a whole. And then we need to start figuring out what are the priorities. Each week, we need to figure out, okay, this week we're going to go looking at construction sites for litter violations, ordinance violations, because coyotes or whatever. Or we might want to say that this week is, because it's high season, we're going to devote all our resources to short-term rental compliance issues, et cetera.
But there are certain issues or certain ordinances that I think should be pursued daily. And if you want to have an initial verbal warning, then a written warning or whatever, but for example, the dumpster items that we've talked about under this, that should be it's a quality of life issue here in the island. That should be addressed daily, at least in my mind. Right. Right. And so then, on top of that, the parking on Beach Walker Drive, that's a quality of life issue. That should be addressed daily. But what you're asking, so I believe what you're looking for is a protocol, if you will. Do you first give a warning and then what the next step is? So that would require then keeping a list of the offenders, not parking, of course, but like the offenders with respect to covering the dumpsters. Once they get their warning, you log it into whatever database you have, and then the next time they do something wrong, he's getting a citation of some sort.
Well, yeah, bottom line is we are working, Craig's in the process of drafting, and you'll be working with him on developing a written set of policies and procedures. I've reviewed some from other communities. There are some communities that have literally 20-page documents that are the policy and procedures. I don't think we need to be quite that extensive. We actually don't have quite the range of code violation, municipal code issues that large cities and other communities may have. But one of the things I've asked Craig to do is with regard to we're going to be calling people community service officers. They are going to be designated as code enforcement officers, but their title is going to be community service officer, and that their responsibilities will be not just code enforcement, but traffic management, patrol, et cetera, but particularly that I want our team to have more presence, more visibility on the island on a regular basis. So
Who will these people be?
we have two currently.
Who are?
It is Kent Bold and Tony Gallagher. And then we are in the process of hiring a third one right now. We're down to final candidates, and Stephanie and Craig and Russ will review those final candidates to make a decision. And then we'll need to make a decision as to whether that's the right number, given what we want to establish as priorities and what we think needs to be addressed.
Going back to the one you talked about with the Beach Walker, the thing I emailed you about on January 1st, and I'm not questioning the Beach Patrol, who was doing their best with an ambiguity, that they did what their job was. But I think we also need to consider in overall policies, where do we have a really hard line and where do we have a soft line? And in the case of the people that were parked in front of Beach Walker, I live right there. It didn't bother me. Maybe it bothered somebody else. But these people did not socially engineer their way through the gate, which everybody knows how to do. So what behaviors are we trying to encourage and discourage? And if we want people to go to the beach and we don't want them to go through the gate, maybe it's okay on holidays, like you said,
Well, and again, but I think we need to be careful because I would say if it was July 4th and they were doing that, then
It requires thought.
maybe it's a $250 ticket. You know,
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah, and also, you know, who are we ticketing? You know, a $250 ticket could be pretty hefty for some people. So we need to keep that in mind also. It's not, we're not ticketing Keowa people in that circumstance.
No, we're not.
Well, and one of the things we might want to think about, the part of the challenge, and Stephanie reminded me, we do have, in addition to our 3 full-time staff, or 2 now, soon to be 3 full-time staff code enforcement officers, we do have a contract with Barrier Island Ocean Rescue, 2 contracts. One is with regard to essentially, one is for beach patrol services, the other is for evening code enforcement. So pursuant to that contract, there are 2 evening code enforcement officers for the kind of the peak, I believe, the peak season, and 1 kind of off-season. So we also have those resources. So we just need to figure out what do we want in terms of community service representative, community service officers, code enforcement. One of the interesting issues is that there is some overlap in the municipal code, what constitutes violation of the municipal code and what constitutes violations of Kiawah Island rules and regulations. And we might want to take a fresh look at not having our code enforcement officers be as concerned about certain types of things that are, at least in my view, more appropriately the province of a homeowners association. I always use the same example, towels over a balcony. Whatever one may think about towels over a balcony, I think that's perfectly fine for a homeowners association to establish a rule or regulation. You don't do that. Whether that constitutes a threat to public health, safety, and welfare warranting a municipal code violation.
Vote no on that.
Absolutely.
So I have 2 comments on the enforcement issue. One is, I would not encourage you to make it discretionary. Like, on January 1st, it's fine, but on this other day, it's not fine. Make it a rule so that the enforcement people can actually apply it, whatever it is. And even though parking may not have bothered anyone that day, if you need to get a fire engine down there, you may have a safety issue. So I encourage it to be consistent, and I talked to Russ about this with respect to the roll-offs, because there is now an effort to try to control the ordinance, try to imply the ordinance. So we have 6 construction sites on my side of the street, which is only 0.6 miles long, guys, but it's a real pain in the neck. 2 cover, 1's not yet gotten a roll-off, and the other 3 are open, consistently. I like that the one next door is covered now because I don't have, crap all over the construction site on a Sunday morning because the birds or the raccoons or something else has gotten in there. But I do have a problem with the inconsistent application. 3 other construction people on the same street are not having it enforced against them, the cover rules. So I would encourage you to be consistent, whatever it is.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I would agree with Mara as well. The rules can say, provide leniency, a warning, whatever it is, but consistency in the application, it makes it a lot easier for our code enforcement guys, and it holds us to a better standard where community can't say, well, you let this guy do this, and this guy you didn't let do this. So I would agree with that. And then back to parking just for a moment, kind of the same thing there, whatever we decide for parking. I would hate for all the work that Councilman Berner and I have done working on settlement with the partners over parking, and then to have people parking on the side of the road in Inlet Cove or at Sparrow Lake, that would be really unfortunate for those neighborhoods. So I think consistency, whatever the rules are, let's define the rules and then apply them consistently.
Well, a couple of things. Yes, foolish consistency, hobgoblin of small minds, but generally, yes. Rules and regulations should always be applied in a consistent manner. I might respectfully disagree a little bit in that I think any code enforcement officer needs to have some degree of discretion. And I've had these conversations with both Rob and Waz before about particularly interaction with visitors on the beach. And at the end of the day, a verbal warning, their general policy is, I think, a verbal warning in the first instance. And I think as a general matter, unless there's a threat to public safety, that should be our approach more generally. But they've got to have some discretion. If they started getting, a lot of lip and pushback or something like that, maybe, that's kind of stepped up. I don't know. You guys are welcome to jump in on that particular issue, Rob, as to how, because you guys have not just overseeing beach patrol, but you guys have been code enforcement officers yourself on the island going back a long period of time.
That's correct. And compliance is our issue. So if we can achieve compliance with a verbal warning, that's certainly what we'll do. Specific to the parking issue on New Year's Day, the reason we were down there was because we had received a complaint from a property owner that had called the main gate, and the main gate called us and asked us to go down there and address the issue. So there are 37 no parking signs on Beach Walker Drive, and there are only 37, yes, sir.
I haven't seen anything about that on IKEA, sorry.
And so from our point of view, when there's nobody present with a parked vehicle that's there illegally, we can't issue a verbal warning. And quite honestly, the written warning is the 37 signs along the avenue. And while we write a heavy fine, we do that with the intent that the violator has the opportunity to come and present their case in front of the judge, and they aren't subject to any fine unless they plead guilty by payment, or unless it's imposed by the court after their case. So it's not quite a done deal that we write this fine for the max, but with 37 parking tickets, with no parking signs, and with a complaint that came in, knowing that the town over the years has invested lots and lots of time, energy, and resources in the no parking signage, as well as the landscaping along the parkway. The vehicles weren't just parked on the side of the road; they were parked on the bike path, and so it was a lot more nuanced than just vehicles, people wanting to enjoy the beach on a holiday. Over the years, there's been different park managers and different park administrations, and we have worked with them to open the park gate to allow people to park in there when it's not staffed, and that may be something that the town could work with the county park on doing, as opposed to changing the parking ordinance so that it's some days enforced and some days not. So
I appreciate that. And again, I'd say I'm not questioning the issuance of the tickets. It was a clear violation. But I want to note that I'm having conversations with both the town attorney and the town prosecutor. I don't believe we necessarily want to get them in front of court. That should be an option. But I believe, as I read the state statute, the only time in which the state assessment needs to be applied. This basically means more than a doubling of the ticket. We don't get a dime of that additional assessment. That just goes to the state, only applies if the matter is heard in the magistrate's court. So as I read the state statute, we can issue a ticket, and if they simply pay the fine, it should just be the face amount of the ticket.
And I think we're back to, we do need a policy, because I understand what you're saying. I respectfully disagree with some of it. I've been up and down Beach Walker on that day, and I didn't think it was as egregious as it just sounded. I know there are a bunch of vehicles there. Frankly, I just emailed a bunch of you. The signs look like yard sale signs. They don't look serious. We want real signs. We want to do real enforcement, I think. And I think we need to think about who we're ticketing again in this circumstance. We're ticketing Johns Island residents. We're not ticketing Kilo residents. Either paying the fine or taking a day off work to go see the magistrate is a burden.
Well, so you think the sign should be bigger? Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm going to put that on IKEA today. No,
Flashing, they'll like.
I like them, the flashing colors. But I think that flimsy yard sale signs don't show that we're serious about it. I think that it needs to be some kind of professional sign. This cites the
We
ordinance.
do need to look, the 37 signs are overkill, and some of those, yes, we need to address that. I don't think we need to belabor, I didn't want to make this all about one particular incident, one particular day. It was just to highlight the fact that we don't have a set of written policies and procedures, and that's what we need.
Okay,
I do
so
want
what
to
do you suggest then for this? Because I just want to make sure we're moving on, because I want to get done with public safety at 10:30.
Okay.
So what are you suggesting for code enforcement?
Well, no, what it's just to let everybody know, we're working on a draft set of code enforcement policies and procedures.
Okay.
That's the action item. It's in process. That's going to continue. I
Got it.
just want to address one thing that Maura raised about job sites. And at least from my standpoint in directing our public safety department, is, I've said, more patrols, and let's monitor, particularly for, given the coyote issues, monitoring for littering, particularly food waste. We had a very, very constructive meeting, the town did, with, this last Monday morning, with the Home Builders Association, Charleston Home Builders Association. I was stunned. We had probably 50 or 60.
Not that many, but probably about 40, I counted.
Really, 40?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
40
Yeah.
representatives of builders in here. And it was a good constructive dialogue. We had the building department, building services department, we had public safety, we had planning department and finance, all kind of talk about priorities that impacted them. They gave us a lot of feedback on issues, but I specifically raised, I said, guys, if you want to avoid more municipal code ordinances that address your activity, then get your act together in terms of managing job sites. Now, whether that's going to be resonate or not, we'll see, but we said we're going to be patrolling job sites more often to try to identify those things. Just to be clear, more on the one issue, covered dumpsters, that's always going to be a little bit challenging because what constitutes an active job site. But there is no exception, even if whether it's an inactive or active job site, if there's litter on the job site, that's a code violation. And that's one where I have no hesitation. If you're there and you see somebody, you can give a verbal warning. My own personal opinion is that's fine, but if they're not, then you can just issue a citation. That's one we need to address. So anyway, that's it on that one.
Okay. Next item is the evaluation of emergency access locations and the maintenance protocols for those paths while ensuring minimal impact on the dune ecosystem.
Can I ask a question, Mr. Byrne, before you go there? Mr. Mayor, do you want to talk about beach enforcement and that contract as part of this discussion we've just had, or do you want to wait and do that?
There's the fourth bullet kind of
Yeah,
talks about that.
they sort of go together. If you,
Oh, you want to put them out of order? We can do that.
you want to, or you just want to keep the order? Because this is about the beach enforcement, the code enforcement, and the contract.
Well, we do have two contracts, separate contracts with Barrier Island Ocean Rescue. Both are expiring. One expires the 7th, I believe. I believe the one on the 7th is for the beach patrol services. That is on the town's, that will be on the town council agenda for consideration on Tuesday. A one-year extension of a contract that was originally entered into in 2022. And the second contract is with regard to evening code enforcement. That's not on the agenda for Tuesday. That doesn't expire till the end of February 28th. And so there need to be some further conversation with both with regard to Barrier Island Ocean Rescue and some internal conversations about kind of these code enforcement assets.
Policies and procedures as well.
And the assets that we have to deploy with regard to these issues.
So what was it you wanted to talk about?
Maybe that's sufficient. I mean, we have talked, and there's an issue with the code enforcement and more policies and procedures for the beach patrol. Then there's an issue of valuation, and then there's an issue of scope, and where does our scope stop and where does, again, Kika start? So there's sort of the same issue, but we've got a contract decision we need to make that can't be extended a month-by-month basis. It'll have to be extended for a year.
Right.
So we may have to do something different. So maybe that's all we need to say here, because this is it's not a strategic item, it's tactical. But the beach patrol is wrapped up in this code enforcement. So maybe that's all we need to say.
So I wasn't going to bring it up here, but one thing I would like to see added to the beach patrol scope of work somehow is during the red knot attendance on the island, I would like to have somebody down there a lot. You can define a lot of 1 hour, half a day, or whatever, to make sure the dogs are behaving themselves. I think that's really required, particularly with all the chatter we're getting on the island about, the birds. So I want that to be as big a focus to what they're already doing on the beach. So we want to put somebody down there.
And make sure that people are behaving themselves. I see kids out
Yeah,
in the spit all the
100%.
time running through.
100%.
Whether we
I don't
can,
want to get into that, but I just
Yeah.
wanted, that has to be part of what I think their scope.
that we can certainly have a discussion, again, the Beach Patrol Services contract is up for 1 year. They've requested a 1-year extension of that contract, and I've put that on the agenda for Tuesday. There are certainly some, in ideal world, some tweaks to that contract that I think might be appropriate. One thing, it simply doesn't conform to our current form of municipal contract, but it was a contract that was entered into and we're extending under the current contract terms. Whether we want to propose some changes to that contract, whether or not Beach Patrol is, willing to entertain those changes to the contract, or to the point you just raised, we'll sit down and have a conversation about, guys, are you willing to just provide additional, attention paid to a particular area at the beach at certain points of time?
So we're moving into the last dot, or in the last bullet, which is fine. I think that's great, because I don't want to circle back after we go somewhere else. So let's discuss now the last bullet, which is the Barrier Island Ocean Rescue contract renewal and contract terms, service delivery, and recommendations for extension. I mean, that's what we're talking about now, so let's finish that.
Well, I'm not, is there anything more that we need to say at this?
Well, I don't know. Well, contract terms, I really wanted to understand what you wanted to discuss regarding contract terms for that contract.
And I would say we don't want to get too tactical here.
Yes.
So let's think broadly, long-term, not too tactical.
Yeah, it's things like you just raised, which I don't believe, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that the current contract provides explicitly for the town to be able to direct, exactly where you devote your resources or attention in the context of beach patrol services. And ideally, I would like to have, if it's not something like that in the agreement, it's not currently, but again, we can deal with those either on a amendment, looking to amend the contract, or we can simply talk through those issues.
For sure, and I would recommend talking through those issues, just for ease. Michael Sosnowski with Barrier Island Ocean Rescue. Everybody calls me Soz, or Waz sometimes.
Sorry, I always do that.
No, but the scope of work that's defined in the contract really is more about how many people are on the beach and when, during what parts of the year. And some of that is the shorebird population. We increase our staff sort of at the same time that the red knots come on the island, and try to manage that wherever we can. And the rest of the critical habitat area, the goal for us, I guess, we go by directive. So wherever you tell us to go, that's where we go. As long as we're not changing those staffing numbers, there's no change for us. However, I would just encourage to always keep the thought of flexibility in mind, so that we can respond where necessary whenever there's an issue.
Go ahead. I appreciate that, particularly given the fact that we do have 10 miles of beach.
And red knots go everywhere.
You can't be everywhere all the time. And particularly on busy holiday weekends, there are people along at least 8 miles of that beach.
No, but with respect to the red knots, I mean, there was a lot of discussion in various environmental meetings or in IKEA, whatever, with respect to that no leash area down by the ocean course. That's where I was referring that there's a lot of complaints, whether they're correct or not, that dogs are not being controlled in that area during the off-leash season. So that's what I was really wanting to get out, so I have Barry Island down there to make sure the dogs are under control and just take care of that complaint.
Boss, can you also address two things in regards to Councilmember Berner? During that time, exactly how many do you guys have staff? And then your number one priority, so if you're called on an incident dealing with a stingray?
Stingray stings, yes.
Sting, how long does that take? And then if there's someone still out there, and also may want to address, and I'm not sure if we want to talk about this, about Sandy Point and how that's part of Kiowa's Beach and how that is enforced as well. That would be wonderful, because I know we're going to be looking at with the Dunlin and with Coastal Carolina or
Coastal Expeditions.
Coastal Expeditions, potentially council may have to address a franchise agreement to deal with Sandy Point.
So, forgive me, Mr. Berner, your first question was, is it really an issue, the complaints that we're getting down at the ocean course? And the mantra for us is always, always, always call us when it's happening, because we can get there and fix it. Yes, it is far away. Yes, it will take time to get there, but if there's a complaint made, we will respond. Those complaints that are on Ikeowa, for the most part, are days or weeks after they saw whatever incident happened. So we have no way of verifying if there is actually an ongoing or growing concern down there. Yes, there are more people by the ocean course. Yes, there probably is an increasing number of dogs going the wrong way. But every time we see it, we address it.
I just think it merits putting somebody there, not 24 hours, but for an hour in the morning, an hour in the afternoon, just put somebody there.
We try to stay more central than that, but we can, if that's the scope, if that's where council wants us, that's where we'll go.
But Russ, also, what we need to think about in the context of the full-time, non-contracted, but full-time community service officers who are involved in code enforcement activities, whether in fact we may want to have one of our folks separate from beach patrol down that, because we have a bike and they could be biking that area a couple miles back and forth down there.
That's great, because I was actually going to think that perhaps we should have the shorebird stewards get involved, and we can have shared management.
That's what's been
Barry
effective
Island
at the Captain Sam's end, is having the Low Country Marine Mammal Stranding Network volunteers there with their signs every day at low tide, everywhere. I mean, the volunteer aspect is not to be ignored, because they have so many people who care, who could just be there and know our number and call us when there's an issue. Like Lauren Rust calls us every time that someone doesn't listen to the volunteer, and we can handle it that way.
So this is a protocol I think we should create. It doesn't have to be a big effort, it should be a small effort of how we're going to address the shorebirds or the red knots particularly in the spring and summer. Have a strategy plan. It's a shared response by volunteers, the town, and Barry Island.
Well, I think that's fine. We just understand that we are also in the process of taking a fresh look at our beach management ordinance more broadly. And a lot of that's been occurring under Councilmember Kay and the Environmental Committee. It may broaden a little bit beyond that, but that all the dogs on the beach issues right now are largely embedded in the beach management ordinance.
Okay.
And we're going to take a fresh look at that. Apart from the very specific issues that the Environmental Committee have been struggling with regard to that area along the ocean course, whether it's half a mile or less or not, whether it should be off-leash all the year round, or et cetera.
That's a separate
But-
issue. I
but
don't want to get
one
into
of the things we would actually, I can't remember, maybe you suggested, and I think, we should definitely consider, is whether we simply require any dog on the beach to be registered.
Yeah, I talked about that.
Yeah,
You get,
okay.
and they get a collar with
yeah,
a bright
yeah,
pink or
yeah.
a bright whatever, so they're.
And that would instead make life easier for whoever down there, our guys or beach patrol down there in some respects.
And then we can identify if it's a resident dog or a visitor dog. Right, yeah, that's,
So,
Very
anyway.
quickly, Ms. Tillerson, your other 2 points, just so we keep moving. For staffing, the way that the contract is written now, we scale up to 2 people a day around Easter, which coincides with that red knot timeframe, so we can split the beach and be more responsive. And those are 2 10-hour shifts. Yes, sir.
people, 2 vehicles also, or?
Always, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. When we talk about people, we don't double up at any situation. And then the priority responsibilities for those individuals, wintertime, summertime, no matter what, is going to be rescue and response to medical emergencies. So if we have a water rescue, that takes priority. If we have a medical emergency, that takes priority over any enforcement activity. We do way more enforcement activity just because the nature of the beach and the verbal warnings and how many dogs there are and things like that. But those are the priorities. And specifically with stingray stings, which is our primary medical call, those can take up to an hour for that one individual, that one vehicle, to get that person treated, stabilized, do a refusal, because they're not going to go in an ambulance unless they want to, and get them transported off the beach or assisted back to wherever they are. So that does tie up a unit for a pretty extensive period of time. So that's why when people say, I haven't seen Beach Patrol in 6 hours, it's because we haven't made it past the sanctuary with all the calls we get down there.
And with the speed that the vehicles are allowed to transit on the beach, in fact, recommendation would be to actually lower that speed, because our speed limit is much higher than almost any other municipality that I've looked at with regard to beach speed limits. That just actually then increases the amount of time to transit our lengthy beach. So that's.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So over the course of the last 2 to 5 years, with the increase in the population on the beach, in your professional assessment, are you adequately staffed?
We would not have suggested renewing the contract if we thought that we were inadequately staffed. We feel that we can meet the needs of the beach right now. Whether that's true going forward or not will have to be addressed as we review the scope if we want to redo the contract. But for now, we feel that we can meet the need. We did increase staff the last time this contract was proposed. We added another individual, another vehicle, which helps us, especially during that peak part of the day when people need to get off the beach for lunch and how to move and keep everything flowing. But would more people be better? Always. You'd have way more visibility. Would that person be actively responding to something every minute of every day? Maybe not. But it's based on the needs of
Again,
that day.
one thing we might want to think about, whether it's on a bike, we have a fat-tired bike, we specifically acquired that, or one of our vehicles, is their team has medical training. You've got EMT capabilities. You are best positioned to respond to those medical incidents, and some of those take some time. We should think about supplementing with our own full-time staff beach coverage during peak season. So you could have somebody just riding a bike or one of our vehicles in addition to their 2 vehicles for some visibility, and more focused on things like glass bottles on the beach and dogs off leash and metal shovels and things like that, where the higher priority issues from a public health and safety are those medical incidents.
I don't want anybody to throw anything at me, sorry, Jim. But I do see the wildlife truck out there a lot. I mean, are they code enforcement authorized? And is that something, I don't want to distract you from what you're really doing, but are there options like that we could look at? You don't need to answer that direct question, but I'm just thinking about presence on the beach that's regularly there. Sorry, Jim.
No, you're good. So Aaron and I are code enforcement officers. We don't do a lot of enforcement, but we certainly do on occasion. And it's mainly with with beach stuff, occasionally with feeding of alligators. Michael, who's new to our staff, is not a code enforcement officer yet, but we plan to get him that training and certification soon. And time permitting, we have discussed having him on the beach as much as possible, especially during March and April when we have red knots, as well as into May and June when we've got nesting shorebirds. So that's just going to be dependent on, the other research projects we have and the other calls we get. But yeah, I would like to see Michael in particular on the beach more to help with that, wildlife related code enforcement stuff this year.
And there's no reason, Jim, we can't have him do that regardless of whether he has yet, whether I designate him as a code enforcement officer. If he's simply down there visible with town gear on down there, people are going to respond to that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Stephanie reminded me of one other interesting beach management code violation related issue that's a little bit more complex and how to address and resolve is, and Beach Patrol can't easily get there, is Sandy Point. As you guys may be aware, there are many, I don't mean, several dozen boats beached there during the course of...
Hundreds.
Over 100 on a Saturday.
Yeah.
There's hundreds.
Okay. Now, every one of those boats that's beached is violating a town ordinance. Whether that's something we want to particularly try to enforce or not, I don't know. One thing that, yes?
The far east.
Far eastern of the island, you can't really get there
Can't get there
other than
unless
by
by boat.
boat.
I wouldn't leave it alone.
Well, the one issue that we have begun to address is commercial activity. If we're aware of commercial activity there,
different.
we're sending letters to saying, and so what we want to do, there is one, the Dunlin was advertising, with their commercial tours to our beaches, is what they said, the Key Island beaches, and sending tours. So we've met with they subcontract to Coastal Expedition. Chris Crowley, really good guy, very environmentally conscious, and talking about an beach operations agreement, and we need to kind of put that in place. But one of the issues we're going to look at is, are there other commercial activities there that we want to be able to control, and how best to enforce that? We've actually talked about acquiring for a variety of reasons, a boat that public safety or wildlife or public works could. There are a number of reasons that might be useful, but also we could enforce by drone. So.
Couple thoughts. Commercial, I agree, should not be out at Sandy Point. I don't think it's a good neighbor to get rid of private.
We haven't, I don't think there's any
Right.
way practically to do
Right.
it, but if we're aware of commercial activities, we'll try to address that.
With respect to the boat, I would suggest meeting with Donna from the Conservancy. They have a boat that they don't use all the time, and I think it makes a lot more sense for us not to own and perhaps rent from Donna if we can get a nice arrangement with her. I think that would be better. And I don't know why you need a boat to go out there anyway. Every time I've been there, I have only seen private boats, never anything commercial related.
We've been told that there are often commercial.
They're not marked. They're all the charter boats from downtown.
Charter boats from downtown.
There's no markings on their advertising, but they're all
Okay,
commercial.
that's why I didn't see them. All right. But still, it's,
And Jim, could you also address, with Madeline's question, can you also address, can you access that island any other way besides boat? I know there's certain time during, I don't know.
Low tide, you can kind of get there.
If it's a low tide, it changes constantly. There's a couple of inlets that you have to cross to get there with a vehicle. We do have an amphibious vehicle that can get there, and we occasionally go out there. Otherwise, I mean, the easiest access is certainly by boat. You know, in terms of environmental issues, yeah,
Whether,
I mean,
whether
there's,
it's plants or beach or animals. And
I mean, technically that area is in critical habitat, you know, and so dogs shouldn't be out there, but of course there are dogs out there all the time because, you know, boaters are bringing their pets out there as well. You know, and it's hundreds of people on a isolated kind of remote beach, and we'd prefer they weren't there, but it's, you know, it's been used that way for 40
Yeah.
years, 75
Natalie-
years, right? I mean, it's just,
Just, I'm
it's the
sorry.
place to go because
It
it's,
is the place to go.
you know,
It's a
not many waves, it's a great beach, easy to pull your boat up, anchor it there. I mean, it's,
When we say there's hundreds of boats, that's not an exaggeration. It is crowded. So I believe that, I guess there are some sort of charters that go there, and I don't know how many people will be on that boat or not, but the volume of people out there with dogs who are behaving well is astonishing. It's astonishing the amount of people out there. There's no sign saying that.
Someone has liability potentially, right, if something happens on their land?
There's actually
answer to
signs
that.
posted there now if they destroy them, but we do have signs.
Yeah, I mean,
posted.
Understand, just wait, one thing to clarify is areas below mean high tide on the beach is publicly access. That's essentially state-owned property. We can regulate it. We can regulate commercial activity. And we do have an ordinance that says no beaching, beaching of your vessel. But if somebody literally dropped anchor a foot off the beach, that would not be violating our ordinance, and they are entitled under state law to be able to access the areas below mean high tide line. There's nothing we can do about that. And there's no liability to the town associated with that.
As we're looking at other potential areas, we're talking scope for the beach patrol, this may be in scope, but we're regularly seeing people coming over the dunes at Beachwalker Park now and lounging on the river, and we don't want them in the dunes, and there's a lot of reasons we don't want them doing that.
Yeah, we can't hear us.
You can't hear it? Oh, there's a lot of people coming over the dunes at Beachwalker Park now, to the river and hanging out on the river. We saw that pretty regularly starting last summer.
Well, that's something we should definitely be
Right.
enforcing, and that's where one of those things we've got to think about, do we deploy somebody, you know, our staff during, and I don't know, we've got to work out a rotation, weekends coverage and all of that, and do we need additional code enforcement resources to deal with the eastern end of the island as well as the western end of the island?
Well, I'm just getting back down to priorities. We talked about at the beginning of the meeting. If there's nothing that we can do about that far eastern end of the island because mean high water mark, et cetera, then do we just not belabor it today?
I think we should, maybe there's something we can do, but we should probably take it offline and say, form a plan. Either we can't do anything or we can do something about both ends, and what should we do?
What we are doing from an administrative standpoint, because we do have current ordinances, is if we become aware of commercial activity, we, like in two instances, we sent a letter saying, by the way, if you want to engage in commercial activity on the island, you need to have an operating agreement or franchise agreement with the town. And we'll follow up on that. We'll try to come up with a standard form.
Mr. Mayor, this is where I would say we should take, whoever in this council is responsible for environmental, sort of task them with investigating this and coming up with a plan for both ends of the island.
Good idea. Jim and I will look into it.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
So we're gonna move on.
Rob, you're standing there, do you want to say
No, the only other thing that's worth mentioning is the way that our staffing is during the peak season on the beach specifically. It's staggered overlapping shifts that taper up to the middle of the day where we have the most staff and then taper back down. So in the morning, for the first 2 to 3 hours, we only have 2 patrols for the entire 10 miles of beach. And then during the end of the day, for the last 3 hours, we only have 2 patrols for the entire 10 miles of beach. During the middle of the day, from about noon until about 3 p.m., we actually have 6 patrols. But of those 6 patrols, we're cycling 6 people out to get lunch breaks during that 3-hour period. So on paper, we do have coverage of six people on staff every day, but at no time will there ever be 6 people actually patrolling simultaneously on the 10 miles of beach. So.
All right, so I think that's a good segue into, we're going in reverse order, the emergency response protocols and coordination between the beach patrol, public safety, and EMS. So, Brad, is there anything particular that you wanted to discuss regarding that bullet item?
I'm not sure why that bullet item was there. I'm not recalling, so maybe the town administrator can refresh my recollection.
I think that was just having a general conversation in regards to understanding the roles and responsibilities of 3 and making sure that there is a coordinated effort between the 3 agencies, and maybe how that looks, or anything that between Director Harris or you want to add to that discussion. And that discussion may be brief.
One of the things that we did have a meeting with Charleston County EMS at one point in time, and there were some additional kind of protocols in place with regard to the communications package or software that we had to get access to. I believe we've addressed that. So you guys do get real-time coded information. You know what's happening. If there's a dispatch call coming from Charleston County EMS along the beach, somebody says called.
I've seen it firsthand.
Yeah.
Yes, you
Okay,
have.
that's right.
That's correct. So we have we are tied into the 911 dispatch center. We do receive notification of 911 calls anywhere on the island, and our primary focus is the beach. And so like we just explained with staffing, there are times where we have resources that can respond to a medical call off the beach, and then there's times where we might not have the resources to allow them to go off the beach. 100% of the time, if it's a call on the beach, we respond. And otherwise, we do coordinate with EMS. We have the radios and are able to facilitate that. And we do, through the state Department of Public Health, we are certified as an advanced life support agency. When we have paramedics on staff, we can operate to the paramedic level. We have medications, we have advanced airways equipment. I did 15 years of 911 EMS here locally in my past life, and so we do have a full complement of advanced life support equipment available to us.
Which means he can actually do harm too. So
You can do everything but
Very true.
transport, if I said that
everything but
right.
I'm sorry?
You can do everything but transport, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
And if we don't have a paramedic available, we operate to the BLS, the basic life support level, which is typically what most fire departments in the area have. And so we pride ourselves on our ability to serve in the medical world as well. Primarily, water rescue is our thing. Medical and enforcement are the secondary. So.
And Rob, correct me if I'm going to misstate this, but I believe the resort and Kika Security are also plugged into dispatch and hearing.
I don't know what level they have. We
I know
have.
mine circumstance, we didn't call them and they showed up, so I
So they-
assume
I-
they did.
Kika's not plugged into dispatch because Kika's an HOA, so you don't have HOAs plugged in. But what they may do, and Director Harris may direct, they may maybe make the call to 911 dispatch. And now they may have something that we don't know that maybe
They all just
They-
showed
they
up on their
shouldn't,
own.
but
last
you
night.
can direct, you can answer
They probably
that.
got the alert, which is on Alstar, but it's not dispatched where these guys are getting.
Yeah, they used the wrong word.
Say it
But
again?
they're hearing they're on the net and they're
Yeah.
hearing what's going on.
they're on Alstar, right? Or
Yeah,
Alstar.
yeah, they got their own Alstar, so that's probably how they got the alert.
Yeah. And so, Rob or Saz or Director Harris, so in regards to coordination, As some examples, remember when normally how you guys are called in when on occasion, we have, somebody with maybe dementia may get lost or a child may get lost. And so dispatch, you guys are all part of that coordination. When we had the alligator, unfortunately, in the settlement, I believe you guys, or the incident that took place at River Course, how do you guys center your coordination and then how you coordinate that with our public safety department?
So we're primarily in those sort of large, high-profile, high-acuity incidents, mostly support staff, liaising with the town and the public safety department. And so we've, over the years, we've been able to recognize what is a critical call that phone calls need to be made to the public safety director or before him directly to the administrator, and proper notification to be made so that y'all are all aware of what's going on in the island. And so other than that, we're coordinating with the other responders, usually the Sheriff's Office, St. John's Fire Department, and Charleston County EMS, to strategize and figure out the best way to access whatever the emergency is, if it's the alligator in the pond or something on the beach or something on the island, determine what other resources are necessary. If there's a helicopter that needs to be getting involved, coordinating if we can with identifying where to land the helicopter, or how to support getting that helicopter in. But essentially, if all of the key players are in place, for example, if it's a medical call and EMS is responding in a quick manner because they're here locally in-house and they go to the call, we don't need to take a real strong presence on the medical side. So we can kind of step back and support logistically other areas of the call and make sure that all of that's being coordinated.
And one,
You referenced the helicopter. I know we have a contract for emergency airlift services. I don't want to get into the contract at all, but I'm just curious, who coordinates the helicopter use? How does that happen?
I know a lot about that. That's probably best suited for the director of EMS to answer. I can give you a little bit of information on that.
I'm just curious, yeah.
So typically the way it works, normally because there's more fire trucks than ambulances, the fire department gets on scene. They usually make a recommendation to the incoming EMS units, give us an idea of how critical the patient is. Based on our knowledge of where we are, transport distances, time of day, traffic patterns, weather conditions, EMS would be able to make that determination on whether or not to launch the helicopter.
Got it. Okay.
And then the actual decision, once we decide to launch it, it's not just because we launch them or request them doesn't mean that that's what happens. We may get there, size up the scene, do our evaluation, and realize that the helicopter is still a significant amount of distance away, or there's other time constraints. We may have things going in our favor, and it is apparent that it's going to be quicker to transport by ground.
Sure.
So there's a lot of things that play into it, but that's typically how it works. Is we get EMS gets information from whoever's on scene first, and then we kind of take all of these factors into consideration and make that determination whether or not that's going to be a useful asset on that call.
I took about 45 minutes in the back of the ambulance since there's nothing else for me to do, to get a deep dive on some of this and what they explained to me, because I talked about the perceived coverage gaps when EMS is transporting downtown. And they talked about how they logistically pre-position another ambulance, at least up at Maybank, but sometimes at the station there. And then they talked through the helicopter scenario as well. And they told me they've got pre-positioned spots on the island where they know they can land helicopters and get people out. And it sounds like EMS coordinates.
And we'll also have helicopter landing capability, MUSC, and ambulance there as well.
Yeah.
And as part of this, the patient can decline the helicopter service too, right? It's not just EMS saying deliver them. The patient can say, no, I don't want that.
Usually if it's a helicopter situation, the patient's not necessarily in a position to say whether or not they want it, and it's going to be a determination based on their condition, and largely they're
I
not
just know
conscious
one
enough.
particular instance where she did decline it, so.
Yeah, no,
But
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
And not to go into too much more detail, but another thing I learned, maybe it was at the public safety meeting, actually, Mark might have brought this up, that Kika, as they're listening to the net, clears a lane coming in through the gate and keeps a lane open for,
I saw that yesterday at the second gate, and a fire truck was
saw that.
flying through. So yeah, they did.
Of course, that draws a question for me, backups on Keel Island Parkway around Mingo Point and all that to the bridge. As we've got traffic egressing and EMS is trying to get on, I'm not sure how that's something we ought to take a look at perhaps. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. Because if cars are coming the other way, maybe they need to stop traffic leaving the gate as well, so that that unused lane.
Good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
They turn the siren on and everybody's supposed to pull to the side, so.
Is there anything else you guys want to address? Is there anything, just quickly, do you know, Director Harris, anyone, has there been a number of calls to Freshfields? And how do we address that from emergency, from a medical standpoint? If not, just say no. I'm just curious.
Most of the medical calls at Freshfields are related to the doctor's office and transports from the clinician there down to the hospital.
And you hear those when they're
Correct.
coming? Yeah, okay. So you see the frequency and severity, okay. Thank you.
All right, so we're falling behind. We have one item left, and then we'll have a break before emergency preparedness. But I referenced this earlier. It has to do with the emergency access locations and impact on the dune system. So Brad, I'm going to ask you why this is an item. Have you observed concerns with the dune system from emergency access locations?
I have not. You and I thought the Barrier Island Ocean Rescue had previously raised issues. I think there are a couple of things. Do we have the right number of emergency access points? There obviously is some fragility, if putting it mildly, to the one at Beachwalker County Park right now. It's accessible, but Turtle Patrol, for example, isn't interested in driving a big truck down that. The other issue has been the fact that the way our ordinance is drafted, it specifically says that pedestrians should access the beach either on boardwalks or at designated emergency access points. And you see, pedestrians regularly taking advantage of that. I would say probably most prevalently at the sanctuary.
Beach Club also.
And the beach club, but particularly at the sanctuary one has been pointed out, you've got a little bit of a hill coming up to it, and you've got to because it's sand, get some traction, plus there's a couple of curves and blind spots. I think the concern that has been expressed has been, if you're trying to get up that hill or making a curve with a vehicle, and, the potential for interaction with pedestrians and children and on bikes or pulling strollers or what have you. And so how do we want to think about that and best address that? I don't know if that's one of the issues that you guys had.
If there has been one issue that has been problematic for me and my staff over the last 20 plus years that I've been out here, please address this issue with pedestrians mixing with vehicles on vehicle accesses. It is the most dangerous thing that we deal with, and I have made my request multiple times, but please take this seriously. It is inviting an accident, and it's avoidable.
So I have a two-part question. How many emergency access roads do we have, and where are they? And have you made recommendations on how to solve that particular issue?
Sure. So there's 5 total. There's one at Beachwalker, one at Eugenia, one at the Sanctuary, one at the Beach Club, and one at the Ocean Course.
Okay.
And so simply, the most effective way to address it is there's 41 public beach accesses, boardwalks essentially. And so while there's not a boardwalk adjacent to every vehicle access, there are sufficient boardwalks for pedestrians to access the beach. So the easiest thing would just be to remove the part of the ordinance that says that vehicle accesses are somewhere that's safe and expected for pedestrians to access the beach, and just restrict pedestrian access to the existing dune walkovers. And then otherwise, there's lots of alternatives we could look at to give pedestrians access in different places or different ways. But to solve the problem and give us the ability to tell people that they're not allowed to walk on it would just be an amendment to the ordinance. And I say that as if it's a simple process, but I know that there's.
Well, it is a simple process simply to remove the specific allowance.
Enforcement
But
is
yes,
always an issue.
enforcement. And I think it's particularly true at the most problematic one, which is at the sanctuary, because as a practical matter, the parking lot and the bike area is literally directly across from this very inviting, obvious way down to the beach where there is no obvious boardwalk.
Correct.
And in fact, you can't, specifically, you're not supposed to go through the sanctuary and the pool area and all of that.
Correct.
And
So-
that access is well known to all sorts of members of the public.
And that's one access where we've actually had a mother with a child on a tag along behind the bike actually run into the side of our vehicle while we were coming up the access. They were coming down and she couldn't stop, and our guys had to get out of the way, but we got a dent in the side of our truck where they struck our vehicle. So they were everybody. Our guys were a little shaken up too. Everybody was okay.
Where's the liability issue on something like that?
Well, again, enforcement is, I mean, it's one thing, you can say tell somebody you're not able to, because no longer are they explicitly allowed to, but I don't, other than putting up a gate, which is its own challenge to open a gate, I don't see that, particularly at the sanctuary, it's going to be very, very, very difficult to stop people from using that.
And we used to have gates that we would unlock and lock every time we went over onto the beach and came off the beach. But even a gate would restrict vehicles, not necessarily pedestrians. So,
Behavioral change. One thing you just need to think about is don't have vehicles unless it's truly an emergency coming on and off sanctuary. It seems to me the most problematic one. Correct me if I'm wrong. The other ones are more visible and obvious.
I would say the beach club and the sanctuary are the two biggest ones. The problem becomes the beach walker one is on the precipice of falling into the river at any moment, and so Eugenia and the ocean course. The ocean course isn't the best condition all the time, and it's dependent on sometimes the tide, and so also just depending on the pockets of population throughout the season kind of dictates where we get on and off the beach, as well as when there's a call, and so there's a lot of factors. And our preference isn't to use the sanctuary access, but when you have to decide, do I use the sanctuary access, or am I going to drive all the way down to the beach club where I have the same problem, or am I going to drive down to Eugenia? Those are the options.
There's always trade-offs. Obviously, the Eugenia one's going to have a lot less natural pedestrian traffic on it.
Correct.
I don't want to
The
suggest.
challenge is going to be, though, at the sanctuary, where you could put up signs, no public access, do not enter, private, or blah, blah, blah. But the issue is going to be, they have the fireworks there every year, and we have people parking there all the time. There's no other way to get to the
But it's
beach.
also used by, wholly apart from emergency vehicles, it's used by the sanctuary
It
for
is.
their vehicles.
That's right.
And they own that land. Yeah, it's their property.
I don't want to suggest cutting more into the dunes and doing things like that, but, I mean, these accesses have been there for a long time. We're hearing about issues with them and complications with using them. If we were to start over, or if we were to augment, would we consider a different location for better accesses?
Actually, the reason that I just stood up here was to talk about that. So with the sanctuary access in particular, that was obviously put in when the sanctuary was constructed. Originally, the town wanted that access on resort property closer to Windswept, basically just a straight shot like the rest of ours, but the resort wanted it next to their structure. I think in a lot of ways, so they'd have easier access to their pool and to service things. So that's not an ideal location and would not have been, so with that one, maybe there is the potential, as we talk with the resort on other things, of moving that access, or, they can continue to use it, right? But moving our emergency access potentially to, down to the end of the resort property next to Windswept. And the same situation kind of occurred at the Ocean Course as well. Originally, that access was actually supposed to be at the end of the driving range, and there was supposed to be a parking lot there, and then an access to the beach. That didn't happen for a couple of reasons. One was environmental, because it would have to go through a lot more dunes. And two, the resort just preferred to use their existing Ocean Course parking lot to provide, like, they were required to provide public parking spots. And so instead of building a new parking lot and a new access, it would have been away from the clubhouse. It got, so at the Ocean Course access, right, you've literally got to drive on a cart path, by the, the driving range and where all the carts come out, and then you got to jump down about a foot drop at the end of the paved cart path to get down on the beach. I mean, neither one of those are ideal locations. And so just wanted to make the point that, yeah, and you made it before I did, but that alternate locations potentially are an option. But I agree with Rob that, we're out on the beach a lot too, and pedestrians and bicyclists on emergency accesses are an issue, and I think they need to be addressed as well.
Wow, all right. Yeah, I'm just not sure how to deal with it, though. Yeah.
Just FYI, there is also state law that governs emergency beach accesses, both the location and the protection of the dunes. So I won't go into all the details now, but there's some issues about just simply relocating it.
Yeah, that is subject to the State Beach Management Act, and that's under their jurisdiction of now the Bureau of Coastal Management. But as we've learned, one issue there is their jurisdictional interest is only seaward of the jurisdictional line. So all of this starts well before that.
But it does talk about maritime forest and the dune system in the regs. So I don't know where you define that, but it does include that in the regs.
But I believe that it's still, the way it's, I have to go back and look at it, is I believe it's only maritime forest or dunes that are still seaward of the setback line.
So as we are moving off of a topic and we've got a to-do list that results from that, where would further exploration into this particular issue sit? Which one of us should put it on our to-do list, in other words?
I think the environmental.
Now, it's both, there's both public safety and environment. It is, it's a complicated issue because what we've learned is, and it's a true fact, is we only have the 5 beach access points right now. There is really limited, and is that enough? And one of those is falling into the river. The one by the sanctuary is kind of uniquely used by the sanctuary for their own operational and business purposes. There really aren't options down at the far eastern end of the island. The question is, do we need to have an additional emergency access point? There is an obvious area for one.
By Windswept.
But then.
That's the end of the resort's property.
But yes, it is the resort's property. I don't know if Kika has any property that's accessible. Then the issues are, how do you, if the view is from the town, from a public health safety standpoint, that there needs to be another emergency access point, apart from these issues of pedestrians on the access, how do we best accomplish that? And there's contractual ways to do that, and there are other ways to do that. And whether we're prepared to go down that path, and that obvious one is exercising eminent domain. And that would be an obvious basis for exercising eminent domain. But whether we can solve for that otherwise, or we want to go down that path, or, maybe we embed something like that into development agreement discussions.
That's, yeah.
That's the kind of thing we, need to figure out how to address this. So we've got the tactical issue, just what we have right now, and the strategic issue of how do we get more, yeah. So.
That doesn't begin to answer the question of who puts this on their to-do list.
Well, I think the
Several
immediate
of them.
issue is we're already looking, so it's in environmental committee and should be some cooperation with public safety. I think it's probably appropriate to remove the language in the Beach Management Act. We're looking at a lot of other things in the Beach
Yeah.
Management Act that specifically almost encourages or it invites pedestrians to use emergency access points to access the beach. And then then at least if we remove that, it empowers our community service officers and beach patrol to tell anybody if they see them, you're required to use a boardwalk. Enforcement of that is going to be an ongoing challenge. But we also need to think about whether, even though it's operationally more efficient for you guys to access up, the sanctuary, I just don't see, given the resort's interest there, the accessibility to the parking lot and the bike area, that we're going to end up with significantly changed behavior there.
Well, if we're adding another access at Windswept, then you could dam up, I'm just saying if that happens, you add another access at Windswept, you could eliminate the cut through the dunes at the sanctuary. So it is only for their own service vehicles.
Well, it could still be an emergency access field. That's one you might be able to actually gate, though, sign and gate, and that they could use just for their they would be using their service field. It would still be potentially an emergency access point, but not one that would be regularly used.
So if nobody else has a passion around this to put on their to-do list, whether it's environmental or health and safety, I'd be happy to take this one.
All right, well, we're working on the beach ordinance already. We can make that change pretty easily. And then I think that the conversation around the development
Yeah,
agreement is probably.
you guys, why don't you, you guys.
If you want it, fine. If you don't want it, then
Just combine heads and talk about how,
We can do it together.
an approach that we might have to look at
Well, I'm
that.
going to bring it up at our meeting
Yeah.
just to get some thought process going in the safety committee, and we'll just have to talk together and figure it out.
A little
Yeah.
break?
All right, so this concludes public safety and code enforcement. There's only one more big area before lunch, which is emergency preparedness. So we're going to take a quick 5-minute break before we launch into that.
Well, we can probably take a 10.
A 10-minute break? All right. It would take a little longer break.
And I don't think this next section necessarily needs to, involve as much discussion. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, out of your lips.
All right. Emergency preparedness process and partnerships with Charleston County.
All right, Mr. Mayor, so getting back now. We have an hour and 15 until the lunch break. You promise we can get done in that time period.
Yeah.
So this is,
Yeah.
the first item up is the emergency preparedness process and the partnerships with Charleston County Emergency Management during named storms and other events.
I think to some extent, all of this can kind of be lumped together or overlaps. Obviously, emergency preparedness is a critical function of the town of Kiowa Island. We can invite Director Harris to talk about his ongoing interactions and the Public Safety Committee's interactions with the various emergency service providers to Kiowa Island. St. John's Fire District, CCSO, and County EMS particularly. A couple of issues that have come up, there's obviously issues with regard to coordination and communication, protocols associated with that, where Emergency Operations Center, this one, the last storm was in Charleston County. If we have a hurricane threat here, it will be here at the Municipal Center. But a couple of issues that have come up in the context of interactions with the county. And this goes beyond the Charleston County Sheriff's Office. One is with regard to EMS. And right now, we have, as everybody's, I think, aware, we actually have a county EMS vehicle stationed at Station 6 on the eastern end of the island, right by Flyway, close to the ocean course. It is not fully staffed. It is, Dave Abrams has indicated it's staffed on average about 2/3 of the time. We've had conversations with County EMS about potentially, can we contribute, we would be interested in having a conversation about making that coverage 100%. And we'd be certainly willing to, the idea was we'd be willing to top up, to have a consideration about covering the additional cost of full staffing. And we actually had a very productive, what I thought was a very productive meeting with all of the Charleston County EMS leadership, where the takeaway coming out of that was, yes, let's understand what the cost is, and that we would, they would give us cost numbers, and then we would bring to council, I would bring to council, here's what additional monies, which by the way could be paid largely 70% out of ATAX funds, would be needed in order to provide 100% coverage for EMS on island at Station 6. 2 days later, we got an email from the deputy administrator that almost did 180. Kind of said, well, and that was, by the way, that was generally the agreement. That was the path forward. And they did 180 and said, well, no, you have to pay for it all, or we're going to start removing that, because this has been a pilot project for the county to provide EMS coverage on Kiowa Island. I'm going, show me where this was a pilot project. And of course it was some like verbal, they were trying to respond to our interest and pressures on Kiowa Island to have more EMS facilities than simply the facility that is staffed right a quarter mile up the road. How far up that? Yeah, right next door. I pushed back pretty hard on that particular turnaround, which I thought was not particularly in good faith, and said, I'm happy to have a conversation with the county administrator, Bill Tootin, and county council members about, in fact, understanding if the intention really is to pull the services that you've already been providing, and the basis for that really hasn't been any real, gotten any follow-up. There's been nothing that's happened in that direction from the county standpoint. We need to continue to monitor the county budgets and their departmental meetings. But that is an issue that is out there as to the extent to which we will have a ambulance on island and staffed on island or not. Now, somewhat related to that is that St. John's Fire District, which allows the vehicle to be positioned at Station 6, which is a St. John's Fire District facility. St. John's Fire District has come to us previously and said, you know, we're enhancing our capability to deliver frontline first responder medical services to go beyond, you know, EMT, advanced EMT, and going all the way to paramedic. St. John's Fire District has said, we're willing to provide transport services. Whether we drive the ambulance that's there, even if you're not staffed, or we can get our own ambulance and drive the vehicle, and then the county throws up all these issues, liability and otherwise, that, you know, we're not going to allow you to transport, certainly with regard to our vehicle. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. The county. It is a county vehicle.
And they could just take it away at any point?
I mean, yes, that's the county's decision, and that comes under, that's the Department of Eric Watson, Deputy County Administrator for Emergency Management Services. It is Dave Abrams who is actually the EMS Director. Yeah. So. Now, when we had the conversation, their initial very constructive conversation, it was, and I can't, the woman's name I can't remember, or name either. It was actually kind of an understandable, yeah, it was all kind of kumbaya, that sounds good, if you guys are willing to provide additional financial support, because it's difficult for us to justify, which I get, both politically and economically, for the county to justify directing additional resources, additional staffing resources specific to Kiowa Island, when obviously there are needs on Seabrook, Johns Island, Wadmalaw, and all over the county. And they've got to think, you know, prudently about allocating the resources, which I completely understand and get. But what she said is, okay, if we staff up, just understand that this station that is just up the road, that's going to be moved up to Kiowa River in the not too distant future. There's going to build a new facility up there, so that they will no longer have the need for this one, which is pretty close to the island and to Seabrook Island where it services. Not that much further, but a little bit further. But then they said the thought was they would reposition the vehicle, the ambulance at Station 6 to Station 4, which would seem to make more sense for two reasons. One, this other facilities push further away, so push this one closer to the center of gravity on Kiowa Island and also closer to Seabrook, where they have to service. Yes. And that seemed to make kind of intuitive sense as well. But again, that's kind of where we were coming out of this one meeting, and then this email kind of sent it 180. And we... Well, I'm sorry, St. John's, one of the things we need to look at from a legal perspective, I haven't yet gotten a good handle on this issue with regard to whether or not a bottom line is Charleston County's not willing to allow St. John's Fire Department personnel to drive their vehicle. So example, they have medical personnel in the back that are needed in the back of the ambulance. Probably, the issue is transporting, actually driving the vehicle. In Charleston County EMS, is for liability, legal, and other reasons, they're not willing to allow St. John's Fire District. But St. John's Fire District says our guys are capable and we're willing to transport. So. We haven't even kind of gotten to that point yet because we haven't had follow-up conversations to understand what in fact Charleston County plans to do with regard to the vehicle at Station 6 right now. Right now, I believe the status is quo, which is there's a vehicle stationed there, it's staffed with overtime, which is costly, but it's staffed about 2/3 of the time. What their strategic plan is going forward, we need to sit down and have another conversation about that. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Station 6 is?
The Ocean Course at the end of Flyway. It's just past Osprey, just before the Ocean Course. Yeah.
Just to fall in the bucket of this, so the vehicle that's behind the gate is staffed during off-duty time as far as the personnel. They had a budget restraint issue, and is one of the biggest reasons why they actually have to pull back from staffing for overtime. And I believe, and correct, Stephanie, correct me if I'm wrong, the last conversation we had, like the mayor said, it was how much we're, as a town, willing to pay to help them with staffing that, the EMS truck. And like Mayor said, now they're looking at us pretty much covering the entire cost just to staff the EMS truck during off-duty times.
Well, yeah, we were trying to say, we're a partnership, and we kind of put out there, let's just share the cost. We'll pay half the cost of staffing this vehicle.
I'm open to that depending on the details, but is there a countywide SLA on what their response times have to be that comes into play with this? I got to think they've got metrics and SLAs, and they track themselves, and are they able to meet them like they would in downtown Charleston? Service level agreement, or whatever they call it. But I've got to think there's some kind of response time criteria that they've got.
It's not a set requirement, am I correct? It's not a set requirement for it?
Yeah. There weren't issues with response time, and kind of the idea of a shared cost arrangement was initially embraced. We actually have to be mindful of as a community, that we have a lot more, given the overtime staff to 2/3 of the time, vehicle in Station 6, plus the vehicle just off island, is that we have more EMS coverage from the county than do other parts of the county. There is no vehicle stationed on Seabrook Island, for example.
Yeah.
They're simply there if there's an issue, ambulance pulls from the station right here. Same thing with Wadmalaw or other parts of Johns Island. So the county is dealing with their budget issues and their political issues. It's not just budget issues, it's political issues as well. Well, what we have gotten through St. John's is we provided, we approved an ATAX funding request. This was not this most recent year, was the prior year, wasn't it? The $77,000?
It was this year.
This fiscal year for additional training, because they are part of their strategic plan, which Chief Knitzer is committed to doing, is enhancing their medical response capability. Because the way he characterizes it is they're not first and foremost a fire department anymore, notwithstanding the fact we've had a couple of recent fire incidents, that most of the things that they respond to are medical emergencies or medical calls, whether on the beach or anywhere else. And so it's in our interest, or at least because St. John's has a committed presence here on the island, of 2 stations, a good partnership, that my view is kind of money well spent to continue to enhance their capability and adding paramedic capability if possible. But the issue still then is when you need transport. Now, to some extent, that will be alleviated a little bit because there will be an ambulance at MUSC. They were actually, not only did they want to pull back from the 50-50 partnership, they said, you got to provide all the staffing costs. I think they actually wanted to have us cover the cost of the ambulance itself, in addition. So again, it was more than a 180, which I think is $1 million, a million or $1.5 million. I can't remember what the number. Yeah.
To buy it, or
Yeah.
there's a recurring cost?
I can't, was it that much, or?
Yeah, it was
yeah.
like about that much for a brand new one.
Yeah.
You're restocking it and cleaning it and everything else, too.
Okay.
I think it was about 600,000 or 700,000.
Okay.
Yeah. It was. The
So,
total cost includes staffing was.
okay, got it, okay. So the actual, the vehicle was actually 600,000 or 700,000.
But there is a recurring cost also with the ambulance.
Yeah.
Because we're stocking it and putting drugs in it and everything else, yeah.
Now, the problem is, still, we could buy our own vehicle, but we don't have our own EMS. And the question is, they're going to, EMS, this county dispatch deals with county EMS.
Yeah,
So
it's the operation.
there, it's a conversation we just got to continue to have. It's an issue that's out there. Again, they're going to reposition this facility that's just up the road, but that's, I don't know, 5 years down the road before they actually get the new facility near Kiowa River built out. Well, they'll build a new one, and they will no longer, this one will, they would no longer use this one. This one is old and antiquated, small, so.
When the MUSC facility is completed, will they provide any ambulance support?
That's something that they'll be talking with them about. We had approached them being MUSC several years ago, probably about about 2 or 3 years ago, when we were trying to determine and consider, do we sign a partnership with MUSC to be able to provide ambulance service? We were looking at potentially the town contracting with the private ambulance service. So it was my understanding from MUSC that they were willing to potentially sign a partnership agreement with the town, but at the end of the day, Director Abrams said that yes, they're in communications with MUSC, that they have an intergovernment agreement. So if for some reason they leave, being Charleston EMS, if they leave the transport and if they need assistance, if they're available, they're able to contact them to come service. So it is my understanding, and Director may remember from the meeting, that yes, they will sign an intergovernment agreement, some sort of partnership with MUSC to provide service, but they would not be the first. If a call comes in, they're not the first.
It's indirect. Now, the question is whether we could sign an agreement with
Right.
MUSC. So there is, but the issue is, if you put a call to 911 or 311, it's going to county EMS, and they will send a county vehicle. They're not going to direct MUSC's ambulance here unless there isn't a county vehicle anywhere in proximity. The question is, could we have an agreement, so we've got a 711 number, I don't know, whatever, that we call, that somebody can call that and it goes directly to the MUSC emergency facility and they can dispatch.
I'd imagine the MUSC ambulance is for when you go to the emergency room and they want to get you downtown.
That's the primary.
Yeah.
Yep, there's no question, that's the primary reason for that, yeah.
Well, I don't know how to solve this one, but, or anything else that we've discussed. But, but when this has come up before, and it's been, and the community has responded vis-à-vis a police department or EMS service or what, EMS service is the one thing I've heard the community say, we need to have this and we need to have it we need to have it very quickly responsive. So I think unfortunately that's got to drive whatever action that we take. it's a big, huge priority.
That's my
Well,
perspective.
and it's a conversation we've just got to continue to have with the county. Understand that one argument, certainly a political argument, is that we're over-serviced relative to the amount of calls. And there are budget issues, because right now they're paying overtime dollars to staff this facility. So both political and budgetary issues. And we've got to acknowledge that. So we've got to have those conversations, try to solve for their problems with the
Yeah,
county.
well, if they have us between a rock and a hard place,
Yeah.
then maybe we just have to pay.
And it may get down to that. It may get down to that, and we just got to be prepared. And I mean, again, kind of another conversation we'll have, and I'll talk about this a little bit later this afternoon. We are in the fortunate position that we are able to do so, but in each and every instance, we don't want to spend the money simply because we have it. If, the point is also, while we may be overserviced relative to other communities and relative to the need here, the fact of the matter is we disproportionately contribute to Charleston County's budget by virtue of the property taxes that we pay that go to the county. And so, again, we need to be careful about this whole concept of entitlement, because
Yes,
Wouldn't sound good on Live
Yeah.
5.
that's a
We
bad,
might
that's a
know that,
bad
but
word.
that's
But, and that's, you've got to be thoughtful about how we discuss those kinds of issues, so.
Think about this, and I'm going to get yelled at, I'm sure, but when we had the gentleman in from the state last year, wherever he was from, that gave the presentation, he spent the first 45 minutes of his presentation saying response time was not the determining factor. The determining factor was the phone call and the implementation of the instructions by the person there from the person on the phone. So, to give you the example, if the phone person said, give them mouth to mouth, that's more important than a 2-minute response time or a 15-minute response time. He spent 45 minutes saying that that phone call and that response from the phone call is way more important than how quickly the ambulance gets there. So, being overserved, having this luxury is great, but I just don't want people to forget that. Maybe we ought to talk about the quality of that phone call as part of our discussion, rather than just ambulance location and response time.
And Rob or Saz, I mean, again, you've been, your folks are trained, both advanced EMT as well as paramedic, and you guys respond to on the beach and off the beach incidents. You certainly also hear about everything that's happening. St. John's Fire District always responds very quickly. What are the nature of the calls, and how often is it critical that, the response time for the ambulance, and what's your experience with response times for ambulance?
What a loaded question.
Yeah.
So there's so many variables. St. John's usually is positioned best to respond first, and so they bring the basic life support, and they're getting the stuff ready to go with more advanced care. One of the things that I've been very careful to do is listen out and pay attention when the EMS calls come out. Really look at where the ambulance is coming from, and we've had access to that information in the CAD for 6 or 9 months now, and so most of the time the positioning of the ambulances has been very good. Having worked there in the past, there are supervisors that still know I'm out here, and it's not uncommon for me to get a phone call randomly in the middle of the day during the summer and say, hey, how are y'all looking out on the beach? And I'll be like, pretty good, we got this going on or that going on, and they say, well, we're like, that was our last ambulance in the area, like we're moving some stuff around, but if y'all hear anything go out, just listen out for us, or we'll call you directly. And so there are channels of communication that are open that kind of compensate for the movement of the pieces that happens continuously as the day unfolds. So as far as the acuity goes, I think, universally, about 85% of the calls are not time critical. And the stuff that happens in the first few minutes, like you mentioned about the phone call, it's not the heroic paramedic stuff that's saving the life. It's good basic life support care that's saving the life. So having a well-trained basic life support provider on a fire truck or in a beach patrol vehicle, that's, quite honestly, that's what saves the life. If I show up as a paramedic on an ambulance and there hasn't been good quality care by the first responders before I get there, I can throw all the drugs, all the IVs, all the airway stuff, all the cardiac monitors in the world at you, and you're still going to be dead. It's still going to be a bad outcome if you didn't get good quality basic life support care. And so, to your point, yes, it starts with that phone call. It starts with the good emergency medical dispatching, and that chain of survival continues with the good basic life support that first responders in the community are providing. And so, if you have those two components in place, it's going to position the paramedics in a really good place when they show up to have a good outcome for that patient.
So within the last month, I had a contract person at my house have a medical emergency, called 911. Now, I live half a mile from Sora Rail, but the fire engines and the ambulances were there within 5 minutes, and everything was resolved without incident. And I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better response time, a better outcome. Are we at risk of losing that? I guess that's my question.
I think so. Do you want me to weigh in, or is that?
I mean, sure. If you've got, I mean, you know the community. You've been around this a lot longer than we have. So
if Dave Abrams or someone from the EMS community is listening to this later, I'm going to apologize in advance if I'm stepping on anyone's toes, or the fire department or anyone else. I think the fire department has 2 stations that are here, and they have excellent basic life support providers in place right now today, and every day they are staffed. And what I was talking about a minute ago, that good quality basic life support care is what's essential. And that piece is not going away. And we can augment that piece with additional training for the fire department with advanced stuff, with supplementing beach patrol as we can pull our resources and respond as well with some advanced stuff when we're available. And then more ambulances, the better, right? But I think the pieces that matter the most are the ones that are most solidified, and that's the basic life support providers that are embedded in the community. So that's my take.
We are blessed in that we have a fair amount of that capability on the island 24/7.
Correct.
Wholly apart from the EMS vehicle and staffing of that at Station 6, we have, through St. John's Fire District, 2 stations, their personnel who are getting more trained. We provided money to enhance training. I'm certainly supportive of, continuing to do that. That seems very cost effective. You guys provide great training to your team. We do. The only thing that's really at risk is the transport aspect, if that becomes necessary, which is less of an issue in the vast majority. It's not time sensitive in the vast majority of instances. And it's not like we're ever going to completely lose that. It's always going to be relatively nearby, but we would hope if we can work out the right kind of relationship that's going to be, that overall set of circumstances are going to be improved by MUSC being here, having an ambulance there, how you get that ambulance, if necessary, to the patient.
And this goes back to the helicopter discussion. An ambulance isn't the only form of transport that they use. So it'd be interesting to understand what their rule set is and how they manage the helicopter.
Ambulance business. Most hospitals are not in the ambulance business.
And we talked with them, so they have a contract with, if I recall, a couple of years ago, EdMed Care, same company that we essentially have for the island. At the time we talked with them and their person over operations with regards to the ambulance service and, of course, the HELAC service, they said that they may be willing to talk to the town if the town was interested in some sort of private agreement. But in addition to that, Director Abrams has said that they'll have an intergovernment agreement potentially with them because to basically, I think, be able to help maybe service the Sea Islands if for some reason they need backup and if their ambulance is not transporting someone to the main downtown facility. So I think because of the uniqueness of where we're situated at, they're willing to have some intergovernment agreements in place or even talk with us about supporting us when it's not in use.
But I mean, Ron, you're absolutely right. I mean, the ambulance at MUSC, as I understand it, is not there generally to respond to, a 911 call. It is there to be able to move emergency care patients from the facility where that's really triage to where they need to get to ultimately for an ICU or otherwise downtown.
Yeah,
But because it's here and because it's going to be not particularly utilized full-time for that, hopefully, then there's this opportunity to take advantage of that there.
I don't want to step in as the timekeeper, but I know the second bullet is a big bullet potentially. The second bullet, let me lift this up. How's this? Second bullet is a potentially time-consuming bullet.
So,
All right, so
yeah, to be continued on discussions with the county. We just be aware that it's out there, and at some point in time, we may need to provide augmentation.
moving on to, it's the review of the Code Red system implementation, our annual disaster event participation, and the tabletop exercises that we go through every year for a hurricane. Yeah,
Can I add some, or unless you were going to say something?
no, please.
I may have contributed to this. I sent both of you a note a couple weeks ago with some thoughts on the emergency preparedness conversation. And the backdrop was I was watching the California fires. And I don't think Palisades plans on, surely fire is in their list of things that might happen. Probably not the thing they were focusing on. We spent a lot of time thinking about hurricane, and I think our hurricane tabletop exercises probably can contribute to other kinds of events happening here, but that's not the only event that could potentially happen here. We could have a large fire, we could have an earthquake, we could have a bunch of different things that could happen here. And I'm curious about how we will respond to all that. Local officials were getting interviewed on national news in Palisades. What's our role as mayor, as council in those kinds of things? Our badges get us through police lines and emergency cordons. Why is that? I think I know. But, have we talked through that so that we understand our roles and the other roles in that? It's great, hey, let me through, I want to go check my house out. And that's not what it's for. So I think we probably need to broaden our aperture a little bit on what we're thinking about with emergency preparedness. And I know that when we do the annual exercises, Craig sets up with, other key stakeholders and players are part of that, and I think that's great. But there's many layers to this as well as silos of where we need to be emergency prepared. And I just think we need to be more deliberate in thinking through that.
Well, it's a good point. I do participate in the tabletop exercise for the hurricane preparedness, with our safety director, Mr. Harris. And it's I'll give you a brief background. It's a very interesting exercise where all the emergency departments, the EMS, fire, and police are here in this room, actually, at tabletops. And the resort is here as well, and Kika everybody who would want to be here is participating. And they go through mock a scenario where it's a Hurricane 1, and the communications officer then gives out his directions to what to do, and they say, it's now a Hurricane 2, what are you going to do? Then it promotes to Hurricane 3, then it's full evacuation. Craig can probably give some more information, but it's a great exercise. But the unique thing I shouldn't say it, meaning unique, is that the point you made is a very good one, Lance, is because we know when the hurricane's coming, and you can get prepared. You know, the earthquake, it just comes out of the blue. Or a tornado comes, it comes out of the blue. We have not performed tabletop exercise for an unplanned event. And I think we really need to. Greg, can you?
No, duly noted, great. I agree. But to your point, one thing about the tabletop exercise, no matter whether it's a hurricane, fire, whatever, it still goes back to the basic. Who's on first, who's on second, who's on third? Who's going to be receiving information, where the information is going to, and where it start, mainly where it start. And I strongly encourage all of you to attend the next tabletop exercise so we can get all those factors in there, because it doesn't really matter what incident it is. It's just merely who's on first, who's on second, who's on third. What is your role? Who's going to be doing what? And there's a lot of there's a lot of part in those kind of segments where even council and mayor have a role, a decision to make, you know, at the last minute, last second. But that is in the works with myself and the other public safety officials. That's going to put some things together, and we would like you guys to attend because that's very important. Right now, we can be in here right now talking about the retreat, and we may have something on the island, and we have to go to work. And what do you do?
Well, and you're bringing up the key points I was thinking about too, Craig.
Yeah.
And you probably cover this, but, you know, I'm thinking about chain of command. You know, who's the on-scene commander?
Correct.
When is he reporting to the mayor, and when is he reporting to Charleston County?
Correct.
He or she. And, you know, considerations like that. And I also wonder if everything I've heard over the years has been hurricane, hurricane, hurricane. I wonder if we ought to have 2 a year. And I know that's more work, but, you know, one that's more focused on a planned event, like you said, Russ, and then another one's more planned on a spontaneous, unplanned event.
Yes, I put a note. I'm gonna bring that up at the next safety committee meeting, and I'm gonna just put it out there because we have all the 3 emergency groups, police, fire, and EMS. I'm gonna say, you know, I'd like to do an unplanned emergency event and get that ball rolling.
So one of the things I know that Director Harrison mentioned, we did a active shooter event, kind of exercise. But I agree, what we have to probably get back to doing is we used to do through, Gerard and I remember and others, a gentleman by the name of Scott Cave. We used to have a consultant. We have a very thick book. It's emergency preparedness, thick book that our consultant, Scott Cave, created for us. Within that book, it also has what to do for tornado, for earthquake. We've actually have done tabletop exercises, predates Director Harris, other than just hurricanes. Because we realized first on, when I started in Gerard and others, we did focus more on hurricanes because at the time we hadn't had one, I think, really significant since Hugo. Then all of a sudden we were having these, I think, Matthew and Irma and all those things. So we did practice that, and I think we refined that. Actually, as a prime example, it's just the whole snow event where not only the county, but a lot of us were like, you know, what do we do? We don't have certain equipment that you have up north, so what do we do?
Yeah, I was reaching out to Brian before the snow.
Yeah, so
As you were too.
So I think having those exercises, but we also have really good examples already within our book that I'll be able to share with you, and we can take a look at those, and we can actually get back involved with having those. But we used to have pretty more than just a hurricane, but we used to have probably twice a year based on those various other exercises.
And that sounds good. And you know, there's simple things too, like who's day shift and night shift, the mayor pro tem, you know.
Well, I was thinking of that
those
as we're
kinds of
talking,
things.
it's a different response if it's in the day or at night.
Well, and
That's a different response.
even during the day, if it's during a snowstorm and we don't have anybody here other than council members on the island or in the town, you know, there are issues. But now I'm I'm a little bit disconcerted in one respect, is I didn't even realize this book existed.
I think we showed you actually the book, but it's a very thick book. Yeah, you've seen it.
Then
Yes.
bad on me for not
was
reading
gonna
it,
say,
in
yeah,
part
should have.
because to the questions raised, I have emergency declaration authority in certain circumstances, but, the kind of leading up to that, I've had ongoing concerns, we've had ongoing dialogue about whether I'm getting kind of real-time information on events. And it particularly, you can imagine a situation, apart from hurricane plan, simply a nasty cell system moving through where you have increasing intensity of tornadoes in the southeast. Now, those are mostly stayed in Mississippi, Alabama, and a little bit of Georgia. And by the time they get here, the systems aren't as strong. And if we do have tornadoes, they tend to be EF0s or EF1s. But that, who knows, that could change. So what if we had a supercell system, either straight line winds at night that spawned, 2 or 3 more significant tornadoes and or significant damage on the island? No staff are here.
Right.
Who's communicating with whom, and what are the protocols? We're probably on island because we're residents here, but how do we then communicate and coordinate with the various other actors? And I don't have a clue.
And if Craig's on vacation, is it Stephanie? Is it somebody else? There's all kinds of.
And right now, I don't have a clue because I don't feel I'm getting as much information as I need. I was even thinking, for example, how come we didn't activate CERT during the snowstorm, for example, just to try to figure out whether there were, what roads were passable, impassable, were there some limbs down or some, those are a whole coast of.
A valid point. So I also wrote a note to myself. I have our first CERT meeting Monday, and I'm going to bring up this topic as well, because there's a lot of experience on that team, and I want to see what they can provide to us to help us work through this issue.
Even if they can't leave their houses, they can give you proximity reports.
Yeah, they'll look out the window.
So,
All right. This was good.
Thanks. It kind of bleeds into the third bullet, infrastructure. And I know that we're looking at resilience overall, long-term resilience, short-term resilience, things like that. These are some new initiatives. One thing I wanted to share is we're starting to meet with the cell companies about coverage improvement. One thing that I think we need to build into our emergency action plans is there's ways to request contingency coverage from all 3 of the providers. And having those procedures in place and who activates that, I think would be helpful. We'll gather the information on how they do it and how they want to be contacted. But it could be, planned things like the marathon. And they do it for major events. They'll possibly do it for the 4th of July. In my experience, they used to do it for air shows, things like that, or large.
Lance, I missed what you said.
Air shows.
How they do what? Increase cell service?
Increase cell service and capacity. Why my microphone must not be working right. Is that it? I'll use my command voice. Okay. There's ways that you can request augmentation and surge coverage. So we'll gather that up in the next couple months of cell coverage meetings and share that with Russ and Craig and you and others.
Somewhat along those lines, one of the things we had talked about, and I think when I sent the long list of potential kind of things to be looking at, is having, as part of this, it's not so much tabletop exercise, but in the context of tabletop exercise, better understanding with all our critical infrastructure providers, privately owned, whether it's Key Island Utility, Seabrook Island Utility, Berkeley Electric, as well as the telecoms. What are the protocols that they have in place? How do we engage with those? You might talk about Berkeley. I think with Berkeley, they will try to give us some idea if they're going to be taking down the system. But one of the things that when the nor'easter came through, we have some big electrical box right near our pond on Riverview. the water was lapping right at the bottom of that in the northeastern. I'm going, is that like a critical fail point that impacts not just our neighborhood, a lot of others? Are there other similar ones around the island? I'd love to know what their assets are, their access points, and where they could possibly fail in a significant flooding or storm event. Kiowa Island Utility, they've told us they're pretty resilient, but I want to better understand that. If there's a tornado that comes down right on the top of Sora Rail.
We're out of luck.
Get a bucket.
Yeah,
Out of luck.
and then, but again, do we have any understanding of what the consequences are, how long it would take to deal with something like that?
Maybe that's one of the exercises we do.
So,
Well, if it's a localized tornado, I do know utility companies stockpile transformers and other gear for ready replacement. So you would be out, hopefully, minimum amount of time.
but they've got an above-ground treatment facility. I'm just saying, if something comes in and takes out a good chunk of that,
And do they have trucks they bring in? I don't know.
yeah, I literally don't know at that
And
point.
they're a regional provider, but with the regions hit,
Do they have the capability to bring in, yeah.
it's a great question.
Yeah. That is a good
Anyway,
question.
and somewhat related to all of that is we've got these decades-old franchise agreements with our various service providers. All of those need a fresh look with respect to, obligation service level agreements, what rights and responsibilities do we have? Are the economics right?
Well, who's going to do that?
Well, that was one of the tasks to the Infrastructure and Public Works, and we got to figure out whether somebody, I don't know, whether this is legal, whether a town attorney has the capability to do this. This is one of those bigger picture issues. You talk about prioritization. We've just discovered in a couple of other contexts, every one of our contracts. I just found out about this one, I didn't know that the Barrier Island Ocean one was expiring. Found out 2 or 3 days ago, it was expiring on the 7th. Wholly apart from whether there were any issues that need to be looked at, but we've got a lot of vendor contracts, franchise agreements, and I have not the foggiest idea whether they reflect best practices or state of the art. I just don't know.
We
And so-
have a lot of attorneys on this island that we could see if they're interested.
Well, I thought about, whether we might have a citizens legal advisory, I don't want to call it a committee, because, then there are notice meetings and everything, but maybe we have to get to that point. But maybe there is some capability. I don't know how many have experience in, for example, the specific issues with regard to, utility contracts.
Sure.
There's state law issues, the same thing with electric contracts. Some of that is dictated by state law. You're constrained from what you can do as a municipality. You're preempted.
Sure.
All of that, I don't really have a good handle on. I don't know who does. But yes.
We can just put out, I know Frank Cassidy came from the local New Jersey utility. He was a VP or a president, and he would probably be a good source to at least start to get into that.
Start putting our collective heads together, put the word out that, that looking at a fresh look at all our long-standing contracts, particularly these service provider agreements, would be very helpful.
All right, but what are we trying to accomplish? I understand you want to review them, but to what end?
To understand whether we're getting one level, which is probably the least important, the right economics, whether we have any ability to kind of review, since they're encroaching on town property or they're acting in the municipality, whether we have any right to review their, books and records, their strategic plans. Remember, in the development agreement with the Kiowa Partners, there was a provision that specifically allowed the town to obtain a capacity analysis once or twice a year from KIU. I don't know if that was actually ever not exercised. Now, but for odd reasons that aren't entirely clear to me, town had the ability to get that capacity analysis, but that information had to be held in confidence, subject to non-disclosure. But that agreement has expired. I don't really have a good handle in what our rights and responsibilities are with regard to Kiowa Island Utility, because we've got a fairly limited dated service level agreement, service agreement, franchise agreement that may even predate, does it predate? No, it doesn't predate the sale by partners of KIU, does it?
The franchise agreement?
Yeah.
I think it probably predate the sale of the.
But anyway, these, and so, I literally, I don't know what I don't know.
I'd like to see if the community is willing to step up. There's probably a lot of really good expertise in these focused areas you're talking about.
Well, for example, I mean, Lance, not necessarily from the pure legal end, but from the business side, would have a, you know, would have some understanding of what should be in agreements with telecom providers.
Yeah.
We've started looking at the issue with regard to, you know, Comcast and AT&T and fiber optic. And there are some interesting issues around all of that. And there are no kind of service level agreement responsibilities. One agreement we saw, the requirement was that they provide HD. And that was it, you know, so really? So yeah, there's just a lot of, I don't know what's out there, I really don't. Other than I've started looking at these and I've become concerned because looking at them, they're old, they're dated. I don't have the foggiest clue as to whether or not this represents best practice, state of the art, even on the economics. We had a conversation where it's like 3% of gross receipts or something like that, and yet the amount we've gotten from them has barely budged. I'm going, how can that be?
Right.
Given the growth on
Right.
additional dwelling units, plus more time, people are spending more time here, plus they keep raising their rates.
Yeah,
So, and
Good question.
auditing that kind of stuff. What are our audit rights? You know, it's just there's a bunch of issues there. I don't know. We can, we actually can. But there's a separate issue of resources to be able to do that, yes.
All right, so this is a good action item. So someone needs to take, well, I think it sounds like a good action item, that we need to go to the next step and not let this die.
Well, it could either be looked at collectively or in component part. I've kind of suggested that whether the Lance and the Infrastructure and Public Works Committee at least could look at agreements with regard, whether it's the capability there on the committee to look at some of the service provider agreements and provide some input. And if not, then we've got to look at, you know, other options. But there are a lot of other contracts that are, you know, outside that are, you know, again, we just need to be on top of things. Every time there's a new agreement coming up for renewal, then we need to make sure it conforms to our current form of municipal contract. For example.
So I might suggest, Mr. Mayor, that maybe we partner on this, because the contract side of it, I think, fits your capability. And then we're going to have, I'm not.
And it kind of fits under finance and administration and contract management.
That's the other stuff.
Yeah.
The auditing side of it fits under me, so
And in fact, that could be kind of an audit committee function or something. I don't know.
in conjunction with your participation, yeah.
So, but
Yeah,
yeah,
to your
but
list.
I think there is an opportunity, and we've got to figure out how to take advantage of, to your point, community expertise or knowledge to help, you know, guide us and inform us.
Yeah, it could be, there's got to be valuable expertise on the island that we can tap into, has to be.
Yeah, I'm not so sure this is something we'd want to bring in volunteers. This is, I think, more of a professional effort. I can't imagine the city of Charleston bringing in volunteers to look at their contracts.
Somebody with experts, none of us here in this room, as far as I know, have any expertise in franchise agreements.
Yeah, we might have to hire somebody. I would probably rather go down the path of deciding we need help and hire somebody rather than going down the volunteer route.
I would respectfully disagree. I would like to first see what we can tap into for free. We could still decide to go the professional route. It doesn't cost anything to see what's available in the community. It doesn't cost anything.
I just can't imagine another municipality asking for volunteers to view their contracts.
We have
So if you think about best practices, best practice would be to hire an expert, not to ask for volunteers.
I would like, same comment.
All right, well, we'll to be continued on that, and we'll try to come up with kind of a specific action plan, identify which of those types of agreements, but I do think some of our major infrastructure franchise, service provider franchise agreements are a place to start with, and we can figure out how best to tackle those. Well, this a little bit relates to, yeah, the storm, the tornadoes in the middle of the night. This is really, the town has had an MOU in the past. I should have brought a copy with Kika. That MOU, by its terms, has expired. That provided that the town would provide cleanup services, initial cut and toss behind the gate, but I thought it was more, yeah, not just for emergency access, but cut and toss for the entire island. And, you know, part of the issue is that the responsibility of the town? Is that the responsibility of the private property owners and the community association? Certainly, at the very least, the town's responsibility should be to provide emergency access. Now, kind of beyond that, where does the responsibility lie? Who pays for that? What's that?
I don't know if you want to, because this is it. Anyways, this is our MOU that we have.
Yeah.
Is there something specific you were looking for, or just in
Well,
general?
but there was something, what was the economic, it just, that we would,
Essentially, Kika would, we would apply for FEMA dollars if we can. And
Yeah.
if not, the agreement would be that the mayor would talk to the board chair before we go behind the gate, and Kika would agree to reimburse us if we can't get reimbursed back from FEMA.
yeah. But, and then Kika, but you've heard from some Kika board members currently where this issue has come up where they think, well, that should be just the responsibility of the town.
Because of public health safety.
Yeah,
they
yeah,
throw that
yeah,
back
that,
at us.
that not Kika and not the property owners should be responsible for cleanup on private property. I mean, I think it's one of those policy questions. But in any event, the agreement has expired. So there's now nothing in place at all that, you know, covers whether it's a hurricane, major flooding, tornado, what have you, if there's significant damage and cleanup, what are the respective responsibilities of the town and/or Kika, and who pays for what? I don't know, people have general thoughts about that, but right now, we're kind of flying a little bit, not blind, but there is simply, there was an agreement in place, the MOU had expired, and there's
So
nothing
the
to.
prior agreement was the town provides a function behind the gate. Is that, and it's expired. I mean, my head instantly goes to what's a municipality's responsibility?
Well, so the MOU, yeah, that's right. The MOU went kind of beyond what the clear responsibility is, you know, clearing roads for emergency vehicle access.
And
That's-
and behind the gate, are those roads private property? I mean, they're Kika property,
Yes, yeah,
right?
they're all private
I'm not trying to be turfy, but
No, they're all private property, but nonetheless, I would have no issue that, but the question is clearing the roads versus there's a lot of debris there along
Right.
the side of the roads.
Right, but clearing the roads, I think, is just making a path for emergency access.
yeah.
Not like shoulder to shoulder, it's just providing a lane, if you will, you know, fallen
I don't know what's
trees
the
and-
practical
moving
matter
snow
of what we've
blowers.
done in the past. I'm not sure that quite covers that, or it,
So your question is, when we went behind the gate before, depending on the storm, we would go in and we would just essentially cut and toss it on the side. We would go down, shoulder to shoulder. We would do it on the side. We have also, depending on the nature of the storm, have gone in and used our private contractor to remove it, either to do side roads, so we've gone beyond just initial cut and toss for some instances, and we've done also side roads. We've helped Kika, so they will have their contractors out there, we will have our contractors out there. So we're both essentially going down side roads, but we were essentially, through the MOU, stated that we would go in and do the initial kind of push and get stuff cleared out for public safety issues.
Do we have a
Reasons.
contractor still?
Pardon me?
Do we have a contractor
Yeah,
still?
we have contractors already in place. We have Philip and Jordan in case it's a large storm, and then we have smaller contracts in case it's a smaller storm. Kika also have their smaller contractors. So the additional service that we've provided is that we've done some initial debris removal on side roads, but our main support was that we went behind and we cleaned up. So either homeowners would put it out there, or if Kika put it out there, we would go through and we would clean it up. That was probably the biggest support. Brian is in charge of this. Would you say that was our biggest support over the years, other than doing the initial cut and toss with Kika?
Yes. And then just to kind of clarify that MOU was written to, and it kind of formalized what our responsibility is to clean up regards to FEMA regulations. So we, as a municipality, have the option to get reimbursed for certain events. There's a couple of thresholds that need to be met, but we have the opportunity to get reimbursed if those thresholds are met. We are allowed to go behind the gate and do cut and toss. The idea is for emergency vehicle access behind the gate. Outside of that, there's what's a private property debris removal agreement that the community association would need to basically apply to FEMA for. And then if that gets approved through FEMA, then we have every ability to go behind there and not jeopardize any reimbursement. With that being said as well, we can still go behind the gate, clean up, and put forth our efforts and resources, but whatever we do might not be a reimbursable expense. So I think what the mayor was getting at, as far as shared responsibility, shared costs, needs to be memorialized and kind of cleaned up. So that's pretty much the idea behind the MOU. It was an agreement that followed the FEMA guidelines for us to protect our ability to get reimbursed, but also put forth more effort than the community association might have.
All right, so I have a couple of follow-up questions. One is, you said you go through an initial cut and toss. So I'm envisioning there's a tree across the road, you chainsaw it, and you pile the debris on the shoulder. But then you also indicated you do a cleanup, which means you're picking up that chainsawed tree?
Yes, that would be
Okay,
the
that's phase
cleanup.
two,
The
but
cut
so-
and toss is, we're not taking anything
Got it,
off
right.
of the road, it's just moving it to the side.
Okay, so what if a homeowner loses a roof? Would that be included in your cleanup?
It could be, yes, sir. We would have to, then that gets into creating clear and separate debris piles, one being vegetative, one being C and D, which would be structural damage that needs
Yes.
to get cleaned up, hazmat. Then you have to be really careful about making sure all of these debris piles are separate.
Right, that's what I was asking.
But any debris, dead animals is a category that FEMA lists in their debris cleanup. Anything that's not supposed to be there is part of the cleanup. You just have to make sure that you're segregating everything.
Okay.
There are kind of multiple issues here, and one thing an overarching one is, who the hell knows if FEMA's going to be around in the future? Whether there's going to be a FEMA or whether there's going to be any FEMA money to apply for. That's the political
news.
reality we are in right now.
Yeah, that's-
Heretofore, we operated in a way that was consistent with FEMA guidelines, so we maximized our potential to get reimbursed for any expenses we.
With the exception of the last hurricane storm, we did not get reimbursed back, we got reimbursed for cut and toss, but they denied our other claims because they said it was private, so we didn't get always reimbursed.
And therefore, because, but we didn't get any money from Kiki either, did we? No.
Yeah, I just was going to ask, so the denied claim, if you will, then we have to absorb.
Well, we did absorb, we don't have to absorb, that's part of the
What
question.
we've done, yeah, in the past, so that's part of what the
Yeah.
next MOU has to address.
Yes, again, we've got to figure out what responsibilities does the town want to, incur or on board versus what should be the responsibility of private
Sure.
property owners.
Sure, because I can see, the cut and toss for emergency access being in our scope, but the actual cleaning up of debris, I would think would be a homeowners association.
That's what I
Does,
think.
does anyone know why the MOU was allowed to expire?
I don't think it was something that we allowed, we probably just, when it was under Mayor Weaver, we tried to go in and renegotiate the MOU with regards to answers with regards to who pays. Between the Kika board and the mayor and mayor pro tem at the time, could not reach an agreement, so we just never amended,
And it expired a little while ago,
last year.
last year, yeah.
We just never could come up with that kind of understanding. The town had essentially was saying, we need to put in place, there was some additional other cleanup in terms, or some other things to clean up in terms of outside the cut and toss, but it was, okay, if we were to go behind the gate and beyond the initial cut and toss, if the town could not get reimbursed back, then Kika would essentially reimburse the town back. But I think at the time, if I recall, there was a disagreement between if the town is saying public health, safety, and welfare, similar to, or that we should be solely responsible for the cost. Now, there's times, and I think that the other conversation beyond that was, there are times where the mayor and the board chair may decide that the town is not going to go behind the gate. That's a different conversation. But it was really just could not align with who was going to pay if we went behind the gate. So it just was not amended.
So this is complicated by this ongoing set of legal issues, whether they are in fact legal issues is not entirely clear to me, as to the expenditure of public funds in a private gated community. And Kika, this is one instance where, and I understand it, probably I'd be in the same position if I were in the Kika board chair. Kika board wants to have its cake and eat it too, is be able to not have the town spend monies behind the gate in a private gated community, which could be argued don't constitute a public purpose, but money's being expended solely for a private purpose, and then could be challenged, either the expenditure or that somehow that would mean that there could no longer be restricted gate access onto the community.
How do you deal with that with trash then? That's the same.
So that's why I'm saying this is a complicated issue. We are a very unique. There are, I go down rabbit holes on a lot of this stuff. I've read Attorney General opinions. There's not a lot of guidance in South Carolina. And I've been thinking about going up to Columbia, meeting with Alan Wilson, and having a conversation about perhaps getting an opinion from the Attorney General about a range of these issues. But there are opinions from the Attorney Generals in Florida and in Texas, for example, that have said you cannot provide trash pickup, municipal trash pickup, public service to a private gated community unless it is on a full contracted and fully reimbursed basis. As an example, you can contract, but you can't use, therefore you're not using public funds at the end of the day because you're being fully reimbursed. Now, those are, that's Florida Attorney General opinion, Texas Attorney General opinion, not necessarily dispositive here. It's really come up uniquely in trash service. Clearly, we do provide trash service behind the gate to private gated community, and we subsidize that.
All right, so just building on what you just said from Florida Attorney General, so what's the consequence or risk, or what's the consequence of using the public funds in that case incorrectly?
Well, again, the concern that the KICA board has had, and this has been, there is no logical, consistent, legal consistency in my mind. They're willing to accept services, because obviously we provide a wide range of services, zoning and code enforcement behind a gate to a private gated community. But they've been concerned that, and I do not believe this argument has substantial merit, but the concern has been if the town owns facilities or provides deals with infrastructure rather than just services, that imperils the ability of the private gate to restrict, the gate to restrict the public from, the KICA from restricting the public from having
Got it.
general access.
So public money spent behind the gate opens the gate up to the public.
Yes, but we obviously are already more than well pregnant in that regard, and there's been this odd view, and the idea is, well, okay, if it's challenged, it's just a service, that's easy to cut off the service, but if you own property or an infrastructure, for example, if the town wanted to exercise eminent domain and put a cell tower, a town-owned cell tower, does that somehow imperil access to the gate? Comparison, looked at a lot of issues here. Interestingly enough, Seabrook Island is more gated than we are. They don't have a resort.
Yes.
The town owns the Seabrook Island Utility Commission. They own the utility, and it's all entirely behind the gate. So,
What did Max say about this?
It's more of conversation I've had with Eric Scheidel, various conversations with the Municipal Association of South Carolina, because he's got a broader lens on all this. Mac wasn't even I've raised the question, is access to Kiowa Island utility only through Seabrook Island? He had to ask a question about, I was pretty sure it was. But
Granted, 50 years ago was a different time. There's a lot of things I don't rely on from 50 years ago, but what was the birthright of the municipality in Kika? And I know there's all these covenants conversations going on in the Kika world too, but what was the intent, and is that still valid?
the incorporation of the town, the KICA was established, the Community Association and the General Covenants long predated the incorporation of the
That's
town,
where I'm
which was, I
coming
believe, in
from.
1988.
Somebody decided we needed a town.
Pardon?
Somebody decided we needed a town. So,
And maybe some of you have been here long enough know, it's my understanding that the reason why the town of Kiowa Island Incorporated was to try to stop the annexation of Mayor Riley at the time from essentially annexing Kiowa. That was what I've heard. I don't know if there's something else more beyond that.
but there had to be some kind of legal documentation to establish this,
Yeah,
I
when
remember that where.
when we incorporated, we had to
There
go to the
is, there
state and
was,
get approval.
I've got some of the documentation back at the time that went through, a citizen, essentially a referendum. There was a lot of material. The case was made why incorporation was, preferred outcome. There were a whole host of issues. But the thing I want to make is we're actually, Seabrook and we are more unique than almost any other municipality. And the point that I've made is the town is ultimately inherently responsible for public health and safety of its citizens. Full stop. That's the reason that a municipality, at the end of the day, exists. It is a true fact, as of at least this minute, that every single one of our residents that we're supposed to be responsible for their public health, safety, and welfare resides behind a gate. It cannot be the case, at least I can't really imagine it's the case, that therefore, because they live behind the gate, our hands are tied in providing for the public health, safety, and welfare.
Right.
And once you start down that path, well, well, we're providing for the public health, safety, and welfare in some respects because we're providing zoning source, code enforcement, trash, and all of that, that somehow that means you need to stop at the line of physical infrastructure.
That's what I was trying to get at, is
And-
somebody thought this through, it seems like, at some point. Or not.
KICA has had, the town has gone along, as far as I can ascertain. Is that the best way to characterize it? With KICA's concern about, being able to control access to the island. That's ultimately, causes so much consternation, so many conundrums. What would be good is if were able to say, an Attorney General opinion said, given kind of the unique circumstances, it's appropriate use of public funds to be used on the island behind the gate because you are providing for the health, safety, and welfare of all your citizens, not just some of them who are in separate gated communities.
Eric pretty much said that.
For all our visitors and guests.
Yeah, that's what he said at the workshop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that is the more legally defensible position, but it continues to, for example, it was specifically contemplated in the development agreement that the town could exercise eminent domain over the utility. Specifically contemplated. Town actually looked at doing that one point in time, decided the numbers weren't quite right. But towns often do, in part because you can be a revenue generating source if you want it to be. But if we did that, does that mean there's no longer a gate? So that's kind of where these issues, this little MOU is just one small example of, there's the big policy question, do we want to be responsible for the cleanup and all of that? But that then starts down the path of, if we're doing more than just emergency access, if we're doing removal, is that simply using public funds to benefit solely private parties? And does that create
I understand.
issues? Yeah.
I understand.
But,
Need legal guidance on this one.
But I think your path is the right thinking, is get an AG opinion.
Well, we want to, you only want to get the AG opinion, and when you kind of.
Don't ask the question if you don't know the answer. Yeah.
Yes. And so it needs to be kind of discussed and framed ultimately in the right way. But, if, for example, a conversation came up earlier, is the analysis any different if we decide that we need to exercise eminent domain to create emergency access to the beach? Let's say there was only one emergency access point, and that was a fail point, and that was a major issue for the health, safety, and welfare of visitors and everybody else. We exercised eminent domain, so we owned a strip of land. Does that mean that somehow that changes the complete character of the island? Yes.
Do you know if Kika's actually gotten a legal opinion about?
More, is that a rhetorical question? Well, okay, even if they had, yes, I've seen a memo, or I'm not sure I've seen a legal opinion. I think I've seen memos, maybe from our guys, but referencing Kika. Kika certainly, my guess is there is some opinion out there, whether it's ever going to see the light of day in the deep, dark history of the community association, that raised the concern or risk. And it's probably a legitimate question to ask in light of these other states that have looked at these issues and come to a different conclusion. Now, in none of those instances was where they were restricting. It was a municipality that was providing, services to just a private gated community within the municipality. It wasn't that the entire municipality.
Yeah, like Hilton Head. And I know, Maura, that Kika has worked with their attorney. I don't know if it's a written legal opinion, but I know that they've gotten an opinion from their attorney with regards to all of this. It may have just been oral, but I do know that they've gotten
But I don't,
I don't-
I don't know what that.
I don't know what it said,
Yeah,
of course. We don't know
and
that.
again, that's the issue. It's one thing to say, it is my opinion, and it's an opinion of counsel, not just here's what I think is, versus
Right. Right.
which, and that says, if the town were to do this, or the Kika were to accept funds, it was more that Kika was accepting funds or applying for tax funds or something like that, that the Kika would no longer be able to restrict access to owners and property owners and their
On
guests.
boardwalks, to help repair
Yeah.
boardwalks.
Or was it simply advised not to do so because the dollar amount wasn't particularly meaningful relative to maybe a modest legal risk? And that's what you just have no idea, and we don't need to talk about, Kika-related issues in that regard, but the uncertainty is just to say, we have an opinion, is meaningless to me.
The Barrier Island contract is another example of public funds behind the gate.
Well, no, that's actually, that's the beach.
But, I know we own the beach. I know we own it, yeah, but it's behind the gate. It's behind the gate.
Well, there is public access,
On Beach Walker, right.
but that provides access to the entirety of the beach.
Yeah.
So the public has the right, whether they can come through the county park or whether they come by boat, and they have the right to transit 10 miles of beach.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
Below mean high tide line.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
So that, and in any event, it's kind of, and I'll talk about this a little bit later today, like the ATAX funds specifically allow state ATAX monies to be used for beach renourishment. Now, having said that, Seabrook does not take, they don't have nearly as much ATAX money, but they don't use any ATAX monies for beach renourishment because they're concerned, even though the public could still access the beach via the ocean, but they can't access it via land.
Right.
So they don't use any ATAX monies for beach renourishment. So.
All right, we're breaking into the lunch.
Okay. So this is one, folks, it has implications for a whole set of issues. Again, we have a very unique set of circumstances. Seabrook is clearly just this, everybody is just a resident, well, the resident or their guest. Here we have the complicating factor of the resort, which Kika will determine, says there is no public access through the front gate. Who can go through the front gate are guests of the resort. And that's what the Kika covenants specifically allow for, that every property owner is entitled to bring guests. Now, and Kika can't restrict that, the board, they can actually control the terms. They can charge, but they can't restrict guests. They can restrict the public under the Kika covenants. They could say, you have to show some proof that you're actually a guest.
Right. Well, this is an
property.
issue
Yeah,
we're not going to
yeah,
solve
yeah.
today or in the near term, it doesn't sound.
But before we break for lunch, are we going to operate under the assumption that we maintain the status quo? If there's a storm tomorrow, we're gonna push debris to the side of the road and then let Kika pick it up from there?
There is simply no agreement in place right now. So we don't have to have an agreement in place. I think at the very least, if something happens, I think that my view would be the town's responsibility is certainly to clear. We can wait upon that time to make a decision if we wanted to. I think it's better to have some understanding in place, but it's difficult to have this particular, this agreement in place, given the uncertainty with regard to, since this is, we constructed this to comply with FEMA requirements, and complete uncertainty as to that makes it challenging to even enter into the, it could be all qualified to the extent that FEMA funds are available and to the extent that there are FEMA criteria that, you know, exist.
I mean, a real disaster, solve the problem and then sort out the issues later. I mean,
Yeah, and this is another thing, I get, apart from the, just from a policy standpoint, you know, we're mindful, we've got to kind of wear, it's hard not to wear two hats. You know, we're responsible for the health, safety, and welfare of our citizens. Every one of our citizens is a member of the community association. Yes, that's our we. And, you know, it's clearly the town has more financial resources, revenue generating resources. We have reserve funds for these kinds of things. You know, if KICA is required to onboard a lot of these costs, then that's going to result in probably special assessments and all of that. It's kind of difficult to square that circle as to kind of what the right answer is.
If I had to look back, I'd rather we provided essential emergency services and then figured it out after the fact, to be honest. But I know there's precedent and implications.
Clearing 8,000 residents' trash who are not citizens,
Right. There's only 2,100.
there's only 2,100 citizens. So you do get into, why are you clearing everyone's trash?
More, that's, I'm sorry, when we say health, safety, and responsibility of citizens, but that is a kind of narrowly defined term. Clearly, visitors, we have a public health and safety responsibility for visitors as well as full-time residents. We have a health, safety, and responsibility for part-time residents in addition to full-time
So
residents.
you view part-timers as visitors?
They're all citizens. They're not voting citizens, but they're certainly, they are property owners in our community. I'm sorry, City of Charleston does not say, we're not going to provide fire police services to part-time property owners or to visitors. You're getting mugged and you're a visitor to the island. We're not going to provide, to Charleston City, we're not going to come to your aid. That's just, that's not what it means. It's not, the definition is not any city that is limited to public health and safety for the full-time voting residents.
Tell me your driver's license.
Before I help you, let me see.
All right, let's do the
Anyway,
lunch break.
okay.
Whenever you want to get a chance, this is